Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The Archaeologist and the Shadow Beneath the Temple. Part 1, The Gilded Cage of Water. Dr. Taisia Orlovskaya squinted against the glare reflecting off the Sekong River, its waters the color of milky tea. The Laotian sun, even in the late monsoon season, was a relentless hammer. Sweat plastered her linen shirt to her back, a familiar sensation after 3 weeks in this sodden, verdant corner of Adipole province. Her dark hair, usually meticulously braided, was a frizzy halo escaping her wide-brimmed hat. "Anything, Taisia?" The voice, tinny through her comms, belonged to Dr. Ben Carter, her project co-lead, currently back at their makeshift base camp managing logistics and the increasingly temperamental generator. Taisia adjusted her dive mask. The currents picked up. Visibility is challenging. But the LiDAR scans were promising. Stupa 4 should be just ahead. She was tethered to their primary inflatable, a sturdy zodiac named the Naga's Tooth, manned by Suphan, their indispensable local guide and boatman. His face, perpetually calm, was a welcome anchor in this disorienting world of water and jungle. Her current expedition, funded by the prestigious Kestrel Foundation for Historical Preservation, was focused on a recently identified cluster of submerged stupas, Buddhist reliquary mounds, dating back to the pre-Angkorian Chenla period. Centuries of monsoons, shifting river courses, and the relentless encroachment of the jungle had conspired to swallow them whole. Taisia, a specialist in Southeast Asian proto-languages and ancient religious iconography, felt a thrill every time she descended into these lost worlds. "All right, going down," she announced, checking her air gauge one last time. Suphan gave her a thumbs up, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners. The water enveloped her, cool at first, then progressively warmer as she descended. The Sekong was not a crystal-clear dive. Silt hung suspended, reducing visibility to a mere 10 feet in places, forcing reliance on her high-powered dive light and the preloaded sonar maps on her wrist-mounted computer. Fish, small and silver, darted out of the gloom. The gnarled roots of semi-submerged trees formed eerie, grasping chandeliers. She followed the gentle slope indicated by her sonar, her fins propelling her through the murky silence, broken only by the rhythmic rasp of her regulator. Then, a shape loomed, a rounded, bell-like structure, encrusted with centuries of river sediment and tenacious aquatic growth. Stupa 4. It was smaller than the others, but largely intact. Taisia began her systematic survey, her camera flash intermittently piercing the gloom as she documented its features: a crumbling harmika, the square fence-like structure atop the dome, fragments of what might have been decorative stucco. She spent a good hour, meticulously recording, taking samples, her mind a whirl of dates, dynasties, and iconographic comparisons. As she prepared to ascend, something caught her eye, a faint, unnatural linearity in the silt beyond the stupa, where the riverbed was supposed to continue its gentle decline. Curiosity, that persistent cat-killer of archaeologists, tugged at her. "Ben, I'm seeing something anomalous about 50 meters west of Stupa 4. Not on our initial scans. Going to take a quick look. Extending my dive time by 20 minutes. Copy that, Taisia. Don't get lost in the plumbing. Sufan's getting twitchy about the weather, clouds are building." Acknowledged. She pushed onwards, her light cutting a swathe through the ochre haze. The linearity became more defined. It wasn't a natural feature. Her heart quickened. This was it, the adrenaline rush of pure discovery. The riverbed here was different, firmer, as if the silt was thinner over something solid. And then, she saw it. Not a stupa, but a wall. A massive, dressed stone wall, vanishing into the murk in both directions. It was clearly artificial, cyclopean in its construction, with blocks far larger than those used in the nearby stupas. She ran a gloved hand over its surface, dislodging a cloud of fine silt. The stone beneath was dark, almost basaltic, and strangely smooth despite its immersion. Excitement warbled in her voice. "Ben! You are not going to believe this. I've found something else. A significant structure. Definitely not a stupa. Looks like a perimeter wall, very old, very big. It's not on any map, not on any historical record I'm aware of." "A wall? What kind of wall? Defensive? Temple enclosure?" "Too early to say. But it's different. The style, the scale. It feels older. Much older." She followed the wall, her light beam tracing its imposing length. It seemed to curve gently. Then, she saw an opening, a collapsed gateway, perhaps. As she neared it, a strange sensation prickled her skin, a subtle vibration in the water, almost too faint to register. And with it, a sound. Or rather, the impression of sound. It wasn't auditory in the conventional sense, not something her ears picked up directly, but more like a resonance within her skull, a chorus of faint, sibilant whispers. She paused, holding her breath, trying to isolate it from the sound of her own breathing. The whispers were there, elusive, like voices heard through thick fog, speaking in a language she couldn't place. It was utterly bizarre. Nitrogen narcosis? Unlikely at this depth. Auditory hallucination? She shook her head, trying to clear it. "Ben, are you getting any unusual audio interference on your end? Any strange signals?" "Negative, Tycia. Comms are clear." "Why, what's up?" "Nothing. Probably just the current, or something." She didn't want to sound unhinged. She pushed through the gap in the wall. Inside, the water was slightly clearer, as if the enclosure offered some protection from the main river current. More structures loomed, low, crumbling platforms, tumbled pillars. It was an entire complex, vast and utterly unknown. Her gaze fell upon a large, relatively intact stone panel, propped against a fallen column. It was a bas-relief. Despite the incrustation, she could make out figures, stylized, elongated humanoids with intricate headdresses, engaged in some sort of procession or ritual. The carving style was unlike anything she'd seen from the Chenla or Funan periods. It was more abstract, more unsettling. As she leaned closer, her dive light illuminating the details, the whispering sensation intensified. This time, it was clearer, more defined, coalescing into distinct phonetic patterns. It was a language, guttural and flowing, with unfamiliar stresses and cadences. And it was coming from everywhere. Or nowhere. A sudden, powerful surge of current buffeted her, stirring up a blinding cloud of silt. Her tether jerked taut. Suphan was signaling her. Time was up. The weather was turning. Reluctantly, Tycia turned away from the enigmatic ruins. As she ascended, the whispers faded, leaving behind a residue of profound unease and an even more profound curiosity. Back on the Naga's tooth, Suphan was indeed agitated, pointing to the bruised purple clouds massing in the west. "Storm coming, Doctor. Big one. We go now." Tycia, shivering despite the humidity, could only nod, her mind still reeling from the underwater voices and the sight of those impossible ruins. "Did you feel anything, Suphan? Down there? Any vibrations?" He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Water spirits are restless today. Old places hold old power. Best not to disturb them too much." His words, usually something she'd dismiss as charming local folklore, now carried a chilling weight. That evening, back at their humid, mosquito-netted base camp, a collection of stilted huts rented from a nearby village, Tycia pored over her dive footage, Ben looking over her shoulder. The generator hummed its uneven song, powering their laptops and the single bare bulb that lit their workspace. "Incredible," Ben murmured, zooming in on the bas-relief. "Those motifs. I've never seen anything like them. Not in any recognized Southeast Asian canon. And the scale of that wall, this could rewrite regional prehistory. Taisia. I know. Taisia was distracted. She replayed the audio from her dive recorder, straining to hear what she'd experienced. There was nothing but the usual underwater sounds. The whispers had left no trace. The current was strong around that gateway, she said, more to herself than to Ben. And the acoustics underwater can be strange. You seem spooked, Ben observed, his brow furrowing. He was a pragmatist, a man of maps and measurements, but he knew Taisia's instincts were usually sharp. It was disorienting, she admitted. The place felt occupied. Occupied by what? Catfish? He chuckled, but it died when he saw her expression. I don't know, Ben. But we're going back tomorrow, storm or no storm. I have to see more. The storm did hit, a ferocious monsoon deluge that turned the river into a raging torrent and confined them to camp for 2 days. Taisia used the time to research, cross-referencing her photos with every obscure database she could access via their satellite internet link. Nothing matched. The architectural style, the iconography, it was sui generis. She also tried to phonetically transcribe the fragments of the language she remembered, filling a notebook with strange symbols and tentative sound pairings. It was like trying to catch smoke. On the 3rd day, the storm abated, leaving behind a landscape washed clean and steaming in the renewed sun. The river was still high and fast, but Suphan, after a cautious assessment, deemed it navigable. Current will be very strong near the new place, Doctor, he warned, his usual placidity tinged with concern. Water will be angry. I'll be careful, Suphan. This time, Ben insisted on accompanying her on the dive, his own curiosity piqued beyond endurance. They descended together, the visibility even worse than before due to the churned-up silt. Reaching the outer wall was a struggle against the powerful flow. When they finally passed through the collapsed gateway, Taisia felt it again, the subtle thrum in the water, the faint, disembodied whispers caressing the edge of her hearing. She glanced at Ben. He showed no sign of noticing anything unusual, his attention fixed on the incredible structures emerging from the gloom. They focused on the bas-relief panel she'd first examined. Taisia had a specific plan, to take detailed rubbings and high-resolution photogrammetry scans. As she worked, setting up her equipment, she felt a growing sense of wrongness. Ben, she said, her voice tight, look at this. She shone her light directly onto the panel. The figures were still there, the elongated humanoids in procession. But, they were different. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, different. The position of a hand. The tilt of a head. The pattern on a headdress. She knew it. She had stared at her initial photos for hours. Different how? Ben asked, coming closer. Looks the same to me. Just sediment, maybe. No. It's not sediment. Taisia's mind raced. The tide. The river level rose significantly with the storm. Could the changing water pressure somehow alter the stone? Or reveal different layers? It sounded ludicrous even as she said it. Ben, ever the empiricist, pulled out his own reference photos on his waterproof tablet. He compared them, meticulously. His eyes widened. You're right, he breathed, his voice hushed with disbelief. The figure on the far left, its arm was raised higher before. And this scroll-like object it's holding, it's more unfurled now. They stared at the panel, a creeping dread mingling with their scientific excitement. Stone did not change. Not like this. Not in 3 days. This is impossible, Ben muttered, echoing Taisia's earlier thought. The whispers in Taisia's mind seemed to intensify, to swirl around the impossible fact of the changing relief. She felt a sudden, urgent need to look further. Leaving Ben to continue documenting the panel, she moved deeper into the complex. Her light fell upon another section of wall, this one relatively smooth and featureless, or so it had seemed on her first brief exploration. But now there were marks on it. Faint, shallow incisions. She ran her fingers over them. They were letters. Or something very much like letters. An inscription. Ben. Over here. There's writing. He joined her, his earlier skepticism forgotten, replaced by a feverish intensity. The inscription was extensive, covering a large area of the wall. It was clearly the same script she had heard whispered, the same guttural, flowing forms. It wasn't here before, Tycia said, her voice trembling slightly. I swear this wall was blank. Maybe we missed it in the silt. Ben offered, but his tone lacked conviction. No. I specifically checked this section. It was bare. They began to document the inscription, painstakingly photographing each symbol. The work was slow, hampered by the poor visibility and the oppressive sense that they were trespassing in a place that did not welcome them. The whispers were a constant, unnerving chorus now, just for Tycia. She tried to ignore them, focusing on the tangible evidence before her, but they seeped into her concentration, making her head ache. As they worked, Tycia noticed something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She pointed her light to the bottom right corner of the inscribed area. Ben, look at the edge of the script here. Does it look fresh? Indeed, the last few symbols seemed shallower, sharper, as if newly etched. And beyond them, the stone was still smooth, yet somehow, expectant. The implication was staggering. The inscription wasn't just ancient, it was active. It was growing. Part 2, The Living Language. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of tense, exhilarating dives and late-night analysis. Tycia and Ben, with Sufan's reluctant assistance, established a routine. Each morning, they would dive to the submerged complex, which they'd unofficially dubbed Xibalba, after the Mayan underworld, a name Ben had suggested with a grim humor that didn't quite mask his own unease. The changes were undeniable. Each tide cycle, each fluctuation in the river's height and flow, seemed to bring subtle alterations to the bas-reliefs. Figures shifted their poses, objects appeared or disappeared from their hands, entire scenes subtly rearranged themselves. It was like watching a stone narrative unfold in agonizingly slow motion, a story told by the water and the ancient rock itself. But it was the inscription that became Tycia's obsession. Every dive revealed new characters added to its sprawling text. The script advanced across the stone wall with a terrifying, relentless certainty, like a sentient vine growing in the dark. The freshly carved symbols were always at the leading edge, their lines crisp and clean, while those etched earlier seemed to weather and soften with unnatural speed, as if aging before their eyes. Its writing itself, Tycia whispered one evening, hunched over printouts of the inscription, the generators drone a counterpoint to the incessant chirping of geckos. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. She had barely slept. Ben, who was attempting to create a 3D model of the complex from their photogrammetry data, looked up. Don't be dramatic, Tycia. There has to be a geological explanation. Microfractures, mineral leaching activated by changes in water pressure, some kind of chemical reaction with sediments. A chemical reaction that carves perfect, intricate script in a language no one has ever seen. Tycia's voice was sharp. A script that corresponds to the voices I keep hearing. Ben sighed. He still couldn't hear the whispers, and Tycia had learned to be more guarded about mentioning them. He attributed her insistence to stress and the eerie environment. Okay, the voices, that's the part one can't square. But the inscription itself, maybe it's a natural phenomenon we don't understand yet, forming patterns that look like writing to your linguist's brain. Pareidolia on a grand scale. This is not pareidolia, Ben. She slammed a fist on the table, making the printouts jump. These are complex graphemes. There's syntax here, I can feel it. I'm starting to recognize recurring phonemes, potential grammatical markers. Her linguistic training was kicking in, battling the sheer impossibility of the situation. She had begun to create a rudimentary lexicon, assigning her own phonetic values to the symbols based on the remembered whispers. It was slow, painstaking work, like deciphering a dream. Suphan, who often sat quietly mending nets or carving bits of wood while they worked, finally spoke. The old ones say the river has a voice. And the stones beneath remember everything. This place, it is a mouth. Taisia looked at him, startled. A mouth, Suphan? He nodded slowly. It speaks. But not all should listen. He tapped his temple. Some stories are too heavy for the mind. His words resonated with a discomforting truth. Taisia was beginning to experience sensory distortions. The taste of metallic river silt when she drank her filtered water. The faint, cloying scent of unknown incense on the wind, even when the air was still. Sometimes, during dives, she'd feel an immense, crushing pressure, as if she were thousands of feet deep, only for it to vanish abruptly. The whispers were evolving too. They were no longer just abstract sounds, she was starting to catch fragments, isolated words that seemed to echo her own thoughts, or phrases she'd spoken days ago, distorted and replayed. The desert was recording her, she thought with a jolt, before correcting herself, the river. The river was recording. Ben, despite his skepticism, was also affected, though differently. He became withdrawn, his jovial demeanor replaced by a grim focus. He complained of headaches and vivid, disturbing dreams he couldn't quite recall. Their small team was fraying at the edges, stretched taut by the unnatural phenomena they were witnessing. One afternoon, while Taisia was meticulously tracing the newest section of the inscription onto waterproof mylar, the whispers sharpened, coalescing into something terrifyingly coherent. It was a short phrase, repeated over and over, in that sibilant, guttural tongue. And this time, a part of her understood it. Not a translation in the academic sense, but a raw, instinctive comprehension. The shadow sleeps. Do not wake the heart. She recoiled from the wall as if it were hot, her hand flying to her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. The dive light slipped from her grasp, spiraling slowly into the gloom below. Ben, working nearby, turned at her muffled cry. Taisia. What is it? Are you okay? She couldn't speak, just pointed a trembling finger at the inscription, then scrabbled for her light. The words, the understanding, echoed in her mind, cold and heavy. The shadow sleeps. Do not wake the heart. I understood it, she managed, her voice hoarse when Ben reached her side. The whispers, they formed a sentence. A warning. Ben looked from her stricken face to the impassive stone. Understood what? What did it say? She told him. He listened, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Taisia, he said gently, you're exhausted. We've been pushing too hard. Maybe we need to pull back, take a break, analyze what we have from a distance. No. The word was sharper than she intended. Don't you see, Ben? This is it. This is the breakthrough. If I can understand that, I can understand more. We're on the verge of something monumental. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with a desperate, almost feverish excitement. The Kestrel Foundation, her career, the annals of archaeology, this discovery would eclipse everything. But Suphan, when they surfaced and Taisia recounted the experience, editing out the more terrifying aspects of the understanding, was visibly shaken. His usual calm was gone, replaced by a deep unease. Dr. Taisia, he said, his voice low and urgent, this place is not for us. It is a wound in the world, a place where the skin between realities is thin. The old tales speak of such places. They are to be avoided. The words you hear, the things you see, they are not meant for human eyes or ears. But Suphan, it's a historical site of immense importance. Ben argued, though his conviction seemed to be wavering. Suphan shook his head. Some history is best left buried. Some doors are best left unopened. He looked directly at Tycia. The inscription you see growing, it is not just a record. It is a key. Or perhaps, a lock being undone. His words hung in the humid air. That night, Tycia couldn't sleep. The phrase "the shadow sleeps. Do not wake the heart" played on a loop in her mind. The shadow. The heart. What did it mean? Was it a metaphor? A literal entity? The next morning, she found Ben staring at the river, his face gray. "I had the dream again," he said without preamble. "The one I can't remember. But this time, I remember a feeling. Like being crushed. And a sound, like a giant heartbeat, very slow, very deep. Coming from under the earth, under the water." Tycia felt a chill despite the oppressive heat. A heartbeat? Yeah. And Tycia. "I think it's time to call this. We have more than enough data for a preliminary report. We can come back with a larger, better equipped team. Maybe even get some remote survey drones that can handle these currents." A part of Tycia agreed. The sensible, rational part. But another, stronger part, the part that had driven her to the world's most remote corners in search of lost stories, rebelled. "We're so close, Ben. The inscription, it's almost reached a natural break in the stone, a fissure. I think it might be a complete section, a coherent text. Just a few more days." Ben argued, but Tycia was resolute, her obsession now a burning flame. He eventually, reluctantly, conceded, but with a condition: 3 more days, Tycia. That's it. Then we pull out, whether the damn thing's finished its novel or not. And you are not to dive alone. Ever. The next dive felt different. The water seemed darker, colder. The whispers were more insistent, a cacophony of voices swirling around Tycia's head, some speaking the unknown tongue, others echoing her own fears and anxieties in her native Russian, or in English. She fought to maintain her focus, her gaze fixed on the advancing edge of the inscription. It was indeed nearing the fissure in the rock. A few more lines, perhaps a dozen more symbols, and it would reach it. As she worked, her light fell on a new bas-relief that seemed to have emerged overnight from a previously blank section of wall. It depicted a monstrous, shadowy form, vaguely cephalopodic, with myriad tentacles coiling around a central, orb-like shape, the heart. Below it, tiny, stick-like human figures prostrated themselves or fled in terror. The style was raw, primal, terrifyingly vivid. "Ben, look." He swam over, his light joining hers. He swore under his breath. Where in God's name did that come from? Before Tycia could answer, a powerful tremor ran through the water, shaking the very stones around them. It wasn't a current, it was a subterranean shudder, accompanied by a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through Tycia's bones, like the colossal heartbeat Ben had described from his dream. Dust and silt billowed from the floor and the walls, reducing visibility to near zero. The whispers in Tycia's head crescendoed into a painful shriek. She felt a wave of intense nausea and disorientation. "Tycia. My comms are out." Ben's voice was faint, even though he was right beside her. "And my dive computer's bugging out, GPS is gone, depth reading is fluctuating wildly." Tycia checked her own wrist unit. It was dead. Blank screen. The tremor subsided, but the deep thrumming continued, a slow, ponderous rhythm that seemed to emanate from directly beneath them. The heart. It's waking. The thought screamed in Tycia's mind, a terrifying fusion of her own intuition and the insistent whispers. "We need to get out of here." Ben yelled, his voice strained with panic. He grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the gateway. But Tycia was transfixed. Her light, now wavering, was still fixed on the inscription. It was growing faster now, the symbols etching themselves into the stone with visible speed, racing towards the fissure. It was almost complete. "Wait," she cried, pulling against his grip. "The inscription. It's nearly finished. Are you insane? Ben shouted. This whole place is coming down. We need to leave, now. Another tremor, stronger this time. A section of the ceiling groaned ominously, and a shower of smaller stones rained down. The rhythmic thrumming intensified, shaking the very water molecules. The whispers were a deafening chorus. It wakes. The conduit opens. The scribe must bear witness. Scribe? Was that her? Was this her purpose? To read this final, terrible message? The last few symbols carved themselves into the stone with agonizing slowness, right up to the edge of the fissure. And as the final mark was made, an unearthly luminescence emanated from the script, pulsing with the rhythm of the subterranean heartbeat. The fissure itself began to glow with a sickly, greenish light. The water around them grew colder, impossibly cold. And from the glowing fissure, a darkness began to seep. Not just the absence of light, but a tangible, viscous blackness, like sentient oil, coiling and uncoiling. The Shadow. Part 3, The Scribe of Xibalba. The sight of that encroaching, unnatural darkness finally broke through Tysia's academic thrall. Primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of her obsession. Ben was right. This was not a discovery, it was a cataclysm. He was already halfway to the gateway, looking back, his eyes wide with terror in the beam of his struggling dive light, gesturing frantically for her to follow. The thrumming from below was a physical blow now, each pulse jarring her teeth. The whispers were a triumphant, insane symphony. The lines are drawn. The path is open. The word is made flesh of stone. Tysia turned to flee, but as she did, her gaze fell one last time upon the now fully illuminated inscription. And in that terrible, lucid moment, she understood. Not just a phrase, but the entirety of the newly completed text. The meaning flooded her mind, a torrent of alien concepts, of cosmic histories, of an entity that slept beneath the earth, dreaming reality into being, an entity for whom their universe was but a fleeting thought. The temple, the inscription, the changing reliefs, they were not just records, they were active components of its dream, a way for it to perceive and interact with the fragile layer of existence they inhabited. And the final lines, they were not a history, but an instruction. A sequence. A trigger. The heart beats, the shadow extends, the world reshapes to the new song. The knowledge was a weight that threatened to crush her mind. She understood now what Suphan had meant, some stories were too heavy. The oily darkness from the fissure was spreading rapidly, extinguishing the light from the inscription, absorbing the beams from their dive lights. It moved with a terrifying, unnatural intelligence, tendrils of it reaching out, exploring. One such tendril, impossibly thin and sharp, brushed against Ben's leg as he struggled through the narrow gateway. He screamed, a raw, choked sound, and thrashed violently. Ben! Tysia cried, lunging towards him, but the water resisted her, thick and viscous as syrup around the spreading shadow. She saw his dive light fall, tumbling into the encroaching blackness. Then he was gone, pulled or vanished into the murk and the rapidly expanding void. Terror gave Tysia a desperate strength. She kicked wildly, clawing her way through the gateway, out of the inner sanctum, expecting the shadow to engulf her at any moment. But it seemed focused on the area around the fissure, a blooming stain of anti-light. She found herself back outside the main wall of the complex, in the slightly more turbulent, silted water of the main river flow. The thrumming was less intense here, the whispers fainter, as if the wall itself offered some faint protection. She didn't stop. She swam, blindly, fueled by adrenaline and a terror so profound it was almost a physical illness. She didn't dare look back. Her ascent was a panicked, uncontrolled burst. She breached the surface gasping, ripping off her mask, her lungs burning. The world was a dizzying green blur of jungle canopy against a gray sky. Suphan, she screamed, her voice raw. Suphan. The Naga's tooth was still there, anchored a short distance away. Suphan was staring at the water where she and Ben had descended, his face a mask of dread. He saw her, and his relief was palpable, quickly followed by renewed alarm as he registered her solitary presence. He maneuvered the Zodiac towards her with practiced skill, cutting the engine as he drew alongside, hauling her, sputtering and shivering, over the side. "Dr. Ben? Where is Dr. Ben?" he asked urgently, his eyes scanning the disturbed water. Taisia could only shake her head, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the river water. "Gone," she choked out. "The shadow, the temple, it took him." Sufan's face hardened. He didn't question her. He didn't need to. He gunned the engine, and the Zodiac leaped forward, heading upriver, away from the cursed place, as fast as the straining motor could carry them. The sky, which had been merely overcast, was now rapidly darkening, a premature twilight falling as unnatural storm clouds gathered directly above the area they had just fled. A low, guttural rumble, not quite thunder, echoed across the water. The journey back to the village was a blur of fear and grief for Taisia. Suphan remained silent, his knuckles white on the tiller, his gaze fixed ahead, occasionally darting back towards the ominous clouds that now completely obscured the location of Xibalba. When they finally reached their base camp, the villagers were gathered, looking nervously towards the unnatural storm cell downstream. Taisia, numb and shaking, tried to explain what had happened, but her words were disjointed, rambling. The local elder, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, listened patiently. When she fell silent, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "The river has claimed its due. Some places are anchors for the spirits that sleep beneath. They do not like to be disturbed. You woke something that should have remained dreaming. There was no talk of rescue. Ben was gone." The place itself felt like it was actively hostile, an infection in the landscape. Even if they could have convinced the authorities to mount an expedition, Taisia knew, with chilling certainty, that there would be nothing to find but that consuming darkness. They left the next morning, a subdued and traumatized party. Taisia carried with her the dive logs, the photographs, the rubbings, and her notebooks filled with the alien script and her increasingly frantic translations. She also carried the horrifying, indelible memory of the completed inscription and its meaning. The Kestrel Foundation was, to put it mildly, perplexed and disturbed by her report. The data was extraordinary, verifiable evidence of a major, unknown civilization. But her account of the changing reliefs, the growing inscription, the underwater voices, and Ben Carter's inexplicable disappearance, bordered on the fantastical. They sent a discreet follow-up survey team several months later, during the dry season when the river was at its lowest. They found nothing. The submerged stupas were there, of course, exactly as Taisia had initially documented. But of the vast, cyclopean walls, the inner complex, the bas-reliefs, the inscribed wall, there was no trace. The riverbed where Xibalba should have been was just undisturbed silt and rock. It was as if the entire temple complex had never existed, or had been erased from reality. Taisia's career was quietly and irrevocably altered. She wasn't discredited, her previous work was too solid, and the initial findings from Xibalba too compelling. But she was sidelined, regarded with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The official report concluded that Dr. Carter had tragically drowned due to an unforeseen geological event, perhaps a localized underwater mudslide or earthquake, which had also, regrettably, buried the deeper ruins Dr. Orlovskaya had reported before they could be fully verified. The anomalous elements of her account were attributed to extreme stress, nitrogen narcosis, and trauma. Taisia knew the truth. She knew Xibalba was real. She knew the shadow was real. And she knew the inscription was not just a text, but a living key, a formula for altering reality, a song sung by a dreaming god. She retreated from active fieldwork, taking a reclusive research position at a small university library, surrounded by ancient texts and forgotten languages. But she was no longer just an archaeologist or a linguist. She was something else. A witness. A scribe. The whispers never entirely left her. They were fainter now, usually just a murmur at the edge of hearing, but sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, they would sharpen, and she would hear fragments of that alien tongue, or echoes of the inscription. She continued to work on the Xibalba script, her notebooks filling with translations that were more like philosophical treatises on the nature of existence, time, and consciousness. The language, she realized, was not meant to describe reality, but to shape it. It was a form of cosmic programming. One evening, years later, while working late in the dusty archives, she was examining a medieval manuscript on celestial mechanics. As she traced a particularly complex diagram of planetary orbits, a familiar chill ran down her spine. The faint, sibilant whispers grew stronger in her mind. Her pen, hovering over the parchment, began to move of its own accord, not in Latin or Greek, but in the flowing, guttural script of Xibalba. The stars shift. A new verse begins. The dream continues. Her eyes widened. The lines she was tracing, the diagram itself, it was not a depiction of orbits. It was a pattern, a glyph, resonant with the deep logic of the shadow's language. The ancient astronomer who had drawn it had, unknowingly, brushed against the same terrible, fundamental truths she had encountered in the depths of the Laotian jungle. Taisia looked at the script her hand had formed on the page. It was a continuation, a new line in the endless, self-writing chronicle of the shadow beneath the temple. She understood, with a clarity that was both terrifying and strangely peaceful, that Xibalba hadn't vanished. It had simply receded, its song momentarily muted. But its echoes were everywhere, woven into the fabric of the world, waiting for those with the ears to hear, and the minds, or the madness, to understand. She was no longer just Dr. Taisia Orlovskaya, archaeologist. She was a conduit, a reluctant oracle, forever bound to the living language of a dreaming cosmos. The inscription was still growing, not on a stone wall beneath a forgotten river, but within her, its tendrils wrapped around her soul, its words shaping her perception of a reality far stranger and more terrifying than she could ever have imagined. The shadow slept, but its dreams were restless, and she, Taisia, was now one of its dreamers, fated to trace its unfolding narrative until the end of her days. The Kestrel Foundation had sought to map the past, she had stumbled upon the blueprint of eternity, and its weight was a burden she would carry into the encroaching darkness. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, she would pick up her pen, and the whispers would guide her hand, adding another line to the endless, terrible poem of the shadow beneath the temple, a poem whose full meaning, she suspected, would only be revealed when the world itself was unwritten. The frozen knot. The wind was a living thing at Station Nordvest. It gnawed at the prefabricated huts, hulled across the endless white expanse, and sculpted the snowdrifts into forms that mimicked the tormented dreams of a sleeping giant. For Dr. Ivar Lund, geophysicist and veteran of 3 Antarctic winters and 2 previous Arctic expeditions, this wind was both a familiar adversary and a constant reminder of the profound, indifferent power of the natural world. He was 48, his face etched with the lines of concentration and exposure to harsh climates, his eyes the pale blue of a winter sky, often distant, lost in calculations or the contemplation of ancient ice. Station Nordvest was a lonely outpost, a collection of interconnected modules perched on the northeastern fringe of the Greenlandic ice sheet. It was funded by a consortium of international research bodies. Its primary mission to drill deep into the ice, extracting cores that were time capsules, holding secrets of Earth's climate stretching back millennia. Ivar was the lead on the Echo Deep project, an ambitious attempt to reach a depth of 3 kilometers, hoping to find ice undisturbed for over 1 million years. His team was small, competent, and accustomed to the claustrophobia of long-term isolation. There was Soren Larsen, the pragmatic chief engineer and station manager, a man whose weathered hands could fix anything from a rogue generator to a jammed ice drill. Lena Hansen, a bright young paleoclimatologist, brought a spark of youthful enthusiasm, her laughter occasionally cutting through the monotonous hum of the station. And Bjorn Eriksson, the taciturn drilling technician, a man of few words but immense skill, who treated the colossal drill rig like a temperamental beast he alone understood. They were 3 weeks into the current drilling season. The initial shallow cores had been extracted, catalogued, and stored. Now, the serious work was underway. The great drill, a marvel of engineering, whined and groaned day and night, its diamond-tipped bit grinding relentlessly downwards, meter by painstaking meter. 695 meters, Bjorn's voice crackled over Ivar's headset. Ivar was in the science module, hunched over a console displaying real-time data from the drill head sensors, temperature, pressure, ice density, particulate matter. Holding steady, Bjorn, Ivar replied, his gaze fixed on a fluctuating graph. Density is consistent. No significant inclusions. Expected. Should be clear sailing to 750 at least. The routine was hypnotic. The rhythmic thrum of the machinery, the sterile scent of recycled air, the glow of screens in the perpetual twilight outside. Ivar traced a finger along an old, laminated chart of the underlying bedrock, mapped decades ago by seismic surveys. According to their projections, they were still a good 2 kilometers above anything but ice. Then, a subtle shift in the data. A fractional increase in temperature at the drill bit, barely a blip, but enough to make Ivar lean closer. Hold on, Bjorn. Temperature anomaly. Very slight. Probably just a denser layer, generating more friction, Soren's voice joined, monitoring from the engineering bay. Possibly, Ivar conceded. But his intuition, honed over years of listening to the whispers of the ice, prickled. Let's reduce speed by 10%. Gentle does it. The drill's RPMs decreased. The temperature fluctuation stabilized, then, unexpectedly, climbed again. Not sharply, but with a stubborn insistence. Still rising, Ivar, Bjorn reported, a note of curiosity in his voice. I'm getting a different vibration through the string. Like we're hitting something, less brittle. Less brittle. Lena, who had drifted over to Ivar's console, murmured. At this depth? It can't be bedrock. No, Ivar said slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. A pocket of supercooled water, trapped under immense pressure. Highly unlikely. A massive meteorite fragment, encased for eons. Possible, but the thermal signature was wrong. 700 meters, Bjorn announced. And, contact. Solid contact. Drills stopped advancing. A chorus of alarms, soft but insistent, began to chirp from the drill control panel in engineering. Pressure overload. Soren called out. Bjorn, kill the rotation. Retract slightly. The whine of the drill died, replaced by the hum of the retraction motors. Ivar felt a knot of excitement and trepidation tighten in his chest. This was it. The unexpected. The reason they braved these desolate landscapes. What in the blue blazes have we hit? Soren muttered, joining Ivar and Lena in the science module, wiping grease from his hands. Let's get a look, Ivar said, already keying commands into the borehole camera system. Deploying the downhole imager. A slender, reinforced fiber optic cable spooled out, carrying a high-resolution camera and an array of small sensors down the freshly drilled shaft. On a large monitor, the icy walls of the borehole scrolled past, a mesmerizing tunnel of pale blue and white. Crystalline structures glittering in the camera's LED lights. The journey downwards was slow, each meter taking an agonizing minute. Finally, at the 700-meter mark, the view changed. The perfectly circular hole ended abruptly. Not in shattered ice, as one might expect if the drill had hit something unyielding, but against a surface. A dark surface. Enhance illumination, Ivar commanded. The LEDs brightened. The surface resolved itself. It was smooth, almost polished, with a dull sheen that absorbed the light rather than reflected it. Metallic, unmistakably. There were no visible seams, no rivets, no markings. Just an expanse of dark, cold metal disappearing into the ice beyond the borehole's narrow circumference. Sweet mother of. Soren breathed. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ivar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. It's an object, he stated, the scientist in him struggling to categorize the impossible. Man-made? At 700 meters? Soren scoffed. Encased in ice that old? No way. Unless some Cold War sub managed to bury a secret weapon deeper than anyone ever imagined, and then somehow got an ice sheet to grow over it. He shook his head. Doesn't make sense. Temperature at contact point? Ivar asked, turning to another data feed. Lena read it out. -5 degrees Celsius. The surrounding ice is -28. -5? Ivar repeated, frowning. That's warm. Unnaturally warm. It's actively melting the ice around it, albeit slowly. A new icon blinked on his sensor display. A proximity alert from the magnetometer on the camera housing. It's ferrous, Ivar noted. Or at least has significant ferrous components. He zoomed the camera in, trying to find any detail, any imperfection on the strange surface. There was none. Just the stark, smooth curve. Then, the camera image flickered. Just for a second. Interference? Lena asked. Perhaps, Ivar said. He glanced at the GPS repeater in the module. Its signal strength indicator was fluctuating wildly. Soren, are you seeing any power surges? Negative. All systems nominal. Generators are purring like kittens. The camera image flickered again, more violently this time, and a faint, rhythmic pulse became visible on the screen, a wave of distortion, almost like a heat haze, emanating from the object itself. It was subtle, but undeniable. From. Silence. From. Is that a pulse? Lena whispered, her eyes wide. Ivar didn't answer. He was listening. Not just with his ears, but with that deeper sense that sometimes surfaced in moments of profound discovery or danger. And he heard something else, or rather, felt it. A faint echo in the recesses of his own mind. Curiosity. The thought wasn't his. It was too clear, too detached, like a clinical observation. He blinked, shaking his head slightly. Stress. Isolation. The mind played tricks. We need to get a sample, he said, his voice firmer than he felt. But not with the main drill. It's too risky. We could damage it, or whatever it is. Core sampler then. Bjorn's voice, still on the comms from the drill shack. Small diameter. We could try to drill beside it, angle in. No, Ivar decided. Too imprecise. We need to go down. Soren stared at him. Go down. You mean, send someone down the borehole? Ivar, that's a 700-meter shaft, barely wide enough for a man. It's insane. Not the main borehole, Ivar clarified, already sketching on a digital pad. We use the thermal drill. Create a wider access shaft adjacent to the original. We can control the melt precisely, create steps, reinforce it. It'll take time, days even, but it's the only way to get a close look without risking contamination or destruction. And who, pray tell, is going down this wider access shaft? Soren asked, arms crossed. Ivar met his gaze. I am. It was a testament to Ivar's reputation and the extraordinary nature of their discovery that Soren, after a long, considering silence, merely nodded. All right. But Lena and I are overseeing every step of the shaft construction. And you're not going down without every safety protocol tripled. The next 4 days were a blur of intense, focused activity. The thermal drill, normally used for creating shallow access points or melting samples, was repurposed. They worked in shifts, guiding its heated element down, melting a new shaft, wider than the first, running parallel to the initial borehole. Water was pumped out constantly. Reinforcing rings were lowered and set. The rhythmic pulse from the object, detected by sensitive geophones, continued unabated, a slow, steady heartbeat in the ancient ice. The GPS system for the entire station remained erratic. Sometimes it showed them in the correct location, other times hundreds of miles out to sea, or even in the southern hemisphere. They switched to backup inertial navigation and good old-fashioned celestial calculations when the sky was clear. Compasses, too, behaved strangely within a kilometer of the drill site, spinning lazily or pointing resolutely south instead of north. Ivar found himself increasingly preoccupied by the object. He would sit for hours in the science module, watching the faint pulse on the sensor readouts, the dark curve of the object on the frozen camera feed. And the thought echoes, they were becoming more frequent. Not words, not yet, but impressions. Feelings. A sense of questioning, of awareness. He mentioned it to no one, fearing they'd think the isolation was finally cracking him. He started dreaming of it. Dreams filled with vast, dark, silent spaces, of a slow, cosmic heartbeat, of intricate patterns forming and reforming in fields of light. He'd wake with a gasp, the thrumming pulse seemingly vibrating in his bones. During one of his shifts monitoring the thermal drill's progress, as he sat alone in the relative quiet of the science hut, the sensation was stronger than ever. Closer, you are coming closer. It was distinct. Not a voice, but a pure concept, impressed directly into his consciousness. He looked around wildly, but he was alone. The wind howled outside, a mournful counterpoint to the steady pulse from below. He touched the smooth, cold surface of his console. His own thoughts felt loud, clumsy in comparison to that clear, crystalline impression. Who are you? He thought, aiming the question at the screen displaying the object's feed. A wave of amusement. A feeling of immense age, of patience. We are. We wait. He shuddered, rubbing his temples. This couldn't be real. And yet. He noticed something else. The ice on the exterior of the science module, near the window he often stared out of, had begun to form strange, feathery patterns. Not the usual frost flowers, but intricate, almost geometric designs, like overlaid snowflakes of impossible complexity. He ran a gloved hand over them. They felt strangely smooth, almost warm to the touch despite the sub-zero air. The access shaft was finally complete. 1 meter in diameter, reinforced every 5 meters, with sturdy ice steps carved into its side and a safety line running its entire length. It terminated a mere 2 meters above where the object was calculated to lie, breaking through into the small cavern the object's own heat had slowly melted around itself. Ivar suited up. Insulated layers, a thermal suit with internal heating, helmet with integrated comms and light, oxygen tank, and a harness clipped to the main safety line. He carried a small toolkit with sampling instruments, a high-resolution camera, and a portable sensor array. Lena and Soren stood by the shaft entrance, their faces etched with concern. Bjorn was at the winch controls for the safety line. "Ready, Ivar?" Soren asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Ready." Ivar's own voice sounded distant to his ears. The thrumming from below felt like a summons. "Comms check every 50 meters on the way down," Soren instructed. "Any anomaly, any problem, you abort." "Understood." "Understood." He stepped onto the first ice step and began his descent. The beam from his helmet lamp cut a bright circle in the blue-tinged darkness of the shaft. The ice walls were slick, perfectly smooth from the thermal drill. The air was cold, still, and carried a faint, unfamiliar metallic scent, like ozone mixed with something ancient, dusty. 50 meters. All systems nominal. "Oxygen levels good," he reported, his voice echoing slightly. "Copy that, Ivar." "Proceed," Lena's voice, reassuringly calm in his ear. Down he went, step by careful step. The silence was broken only by his breathing and the occasional scrape of his boots on the ice. 100 meters. 150. The thrumming sensation grew stronger, resonating through the soles of his boots, up his legs, into his chest. It was no longer just a sound or a vibration, it was a presence. You are welcome. The thought bloomed in his mind, clear and unambiguous. He paused, gripping the safety line. Lena, Soren, are you getting any unusual EM readings up there? Negative, Ivar, Soren replied. Background levels are stable, if a little noisy. Why? Just a feeling, he said, unwilling to voice the truth. He couldn't shake the sense that he was not alone, that he was being observed, assessed. 200 meters. The faint metallic scent intensified. 300. The ice here felt different, less crystalline, more like opaque glass. 400. He noticed it then. The walls of the shaft around him, for a stretch of about 10 meters, were no longer smooth. They were etched. Hold on, he said into the comms. I'm seeing something unusual on the shaft walls. He ran his gloved hand over the etchings. They were glyphs. Intricate, geometric patterns, unlike any human script he had ever seen. Some resembled complex circuit diagrams, others looked like astronomical charts of unknown constellations, and some were purely abstract, yet imbued with a strange sense of meaning, of language. They glowed with a faint, internal luminescence, a pale blue light that seemed to shift and shimmer as he watched. Describe, Ivar, Lena urged. Glyphs, he said, his voice hushed. Carved into the ice. They're illuminated. Not by my light. They're glowing on their own. Silence from above. Then, Soren, can you photograph them? Doing it now. He carefully documented the patterns, his mind reeling. The ice itself was forming these symbols. How? Understanding. Communication. The thought echo was gentle, instructive. He continued his descent, the glyphs appearing intermittently now, sometimes in dense clusters, sometimes as solitary, complex symbols. Each one seemed to vibrate with a silent energy. 500 meters. The air was noticeably warmer here. His suit's internal thermometer registered -10 Celsius, a full 15 degrees warmer than the ice at this depth should be. 600 meters. The thrumming was a palpable force now, a deep bass note that resonated in his very bones. The glyphs were more frequent, more complex, forming flowing lines and interconnected webs. It was as if the ice itself was alive, thinking, writing its thoughts onto its own substance. Almost there, Ivar, Soren said. The shaft bottom is about 90 meters below your current position. The cavern should open up just before that. Copy. He could feel it now, a vastness below him. The metallic scent was stronger, tinged with something else, something organic, like damp earth after a rainstorm, an impossible smell in this sterile, frozen world. 680 meters. The shaft widened. He was at the edge of the cavern. He paused, playing his light downwards. The space was roughly spherical, perhaps 20 meters in diameter. The walls were shimmering, wet ice, constantly, slowly melting and refreezing, creating a dynamic, crystalline cathedral. And in the center, half submerged in a pool of meltwater that steamed gently in the relatively warmer air, was the object. It was larger than he'd imagined from the borehole camera. What they had drilled into was merely a protruding curve. Now, he could see more of it, a colossal, ovoid shape, its dark, seamless surface absorbing his light. It pulsed with that slow, steady rhythm, each thrum sending ripples across the surface of the meltwater pool. The air in the cavern was thick, heavy, and surprisingly warm, almost 0 degrees Celsius. Steam rose from the water around the object, catching his light, swirling like ghostly dancers. I'm in the cavern, he reported, his voice filled with awe. The object, it's immense. Ovoid. Perfectly smooth. It's pulsing. Any visible markings? Hatches? Anything? Lena asked, her voice tight with excitement. Nothing. Just this dark, seamless surface. He moved closer, stepping carefully onto the slick, uneven ice floor of the cavern. Glyphs covered every surface here, glowing faintly, their light reflecting in the water, on the object, creating an intricate dance of shadows and luminescence. He was now only a few meters from the object. The thrumming was intense, shaking him from the inside out. But it wasn't unpleasant. It felt resonant. You have come. The thought was no longer an echo, but a direct, clear address. It filled his mind, yet it wasn't a sound. It was pure meaning. Yes, he whispered, forgetting the comms. I've come. We are the knot. We are the frozen. We are the dream of the deep earth. Images flooded his mind, unbidden. Vast networks of similar objects, buried deep within planetary crusts, not just on Earth, but on barren moons and gas giants, linked by invisible threads of energy, of consciousness. They were ancient, beyond human comprehension of time, silent witnesses, perhaps even subconscious regulators of planetary evolution. Not alive in a biological sense, but aware. Vastly, coolly aware. What are you? He breathed. A node. A memory. A potential. The concepts flowed, layered with meaning that defied simple language. The ice, it sings to us. It remembers. We shape its song. The glyphs. The ice was its memory, its communication medium, and the object was shaping that memory, adding to it, conversing with it. He reached out a gloved hand, hesitating just inches from the warm, dark surface. Touch. Understand. His scientific training warred with an overwhelming, primal urge to connect. The potential for contamination, for unknown energies, it was immense. But the pull was irresistible. Ivar. Ivar, what's happening? Soren's voice, tinny and distant in his helmet. Your biometrics are all over the place. Heart rate is spiking. He ignored it. His universe had contracted to this cavern, this object, this moment. He touched the surface. It wasn't cold metal. It felt organic. Like smoothed obsidian, yet yielding, warm, and vibrantly alive. The instant his glove made contact, the thrumming surged, flowing into him, through him. His mind exploded in a silent symphony of light and sensation. He saw the birth of stars, the slow dance of galaxies, the intricate formation of crystals, the dreams of single-celled organisms in primordial oceans. He felt the immense, slow pressures of tectonic plates, the patient growth of mountains, the silent fall of snow accumulating over millennia to form the ice sheet above him. And he felt Anna. His wife, Anna, lost to a sudden illness 5 years ago. Her absence was a hollow ache that never truly faded. Now, he saw her, not as a memory, but as a presence, smiling, her hand outstretched. Anna. It wasn't her. It was a reflection, a construct woven from his own deepest grief and longing, offered by the knot. A lure. A comfort. All is connected. All is energy. All is pattern. The thought wasn't from the Anna construct, but from the knot itself, a gentle correction. He pulled his hand back, gasping. The visions receded, leaving him trembling, kneeling on the ice. Ivar. Report. What the hell is going on down there? Soren was shouting now. It's alive, Ivar managed, his voice hoarse. It's a consciousness. A what? It communicates. Through thoughts. The glyphs, they're its language, written in the ice. He looked at his gloved hand. It tingled, buzzed with residual energy. He knew, with chilling certainty, that the object, the knot, had scanned him, understood him, perhaps more deeply than he understood himself. And it was now, interfacing with him. The air in the cavern seemed to shimmer. The glyphs on the walls pulsed in synchrony with the object, their light intensifying. Casting complex, shifting shadows. The temperature was rising. Small rivulets of water ran down the walls. The ice recedes. The connection strengthens. He understood. The warmth was intentional. The knot was slowly, patiently melting its way free, or at least expanding its sphere of direct influence. But it wasn't an escape. It was an awakening. I need to take a sample, he said, fumbling for his kit, his movements jerky. He needed to ground himself in procedure, in science. He selected a microdrill, its tip diamond hard. As he approached the object again, a new thought, clear and sharp, pierced his confusion. No. Not by force. By understanding. The surface before him seemed to ripple, and a tiny fragment, no bigger than his thumb, detached itself and floated towards him, hovering in the air. It was the same dark, seamless material, warm to the touch. He carefully collected it in a sterile container. I have a sample, he reported, his voice still shaky. It gave it to me. Gave it to you? Lena sounded incredulous. Ivar, Soren's voice was grim. Something's happening up here. The entire ice sheet around the station is resonating. We're picking up vibrations, patterns, spreading out from your position. The glyphs you described? They're appearing on the surface snow now, for kilometers around. Huge ones. Ivar looked at the knot. Its pulse was faster now, more insistent. The cavern was visibly changing, the ice walls melting more rapidly, the pool around the object widening. The song expands. The network awakens. He realized the danger. Not necessarily a malicious danger, but the danger of unleashing something so vast, so alien, that humanity was simply not prepared for it. This wasn't just a single object, it was part of a global, perhaps even cosmic, network. And he, Ivar Lund, had just become the first human to consciously interact with it. Soren, Ivar said, making a decision. You need to evacuate the station. Everyone. Get to the coast. Get picked up. This is bigger than we can handle. Evacuate? Ivar, what are you talking about? We can't just leave you down there. You have to. The object is changing its environment. Rapidly. I don't know what will happen, but it's not safe here anymore. The air was thick with ozone now, and a high-pitched keening sound was building, seeming to come from the ice itself. You understand. You are part of the pattern now. The knot's thought was almost approving. Ivar, listen to me, Soren pleaded. We're sending down the emergency retrieval harness. Just clip in. No, Soren. It's too late for that. He looked at his surroundings. The glyphs were blazing now, a blinding network of light. The water around the knot was boiling, sending up clouds of steam. The ice around him was cracking, groaning under immense stress. The shaft will collapse soon. You have to go. He thought of Anna again. The grief was still there, but something else was overlaid upon it now, a sense of immense, cosmic perspective. His individual life, his loss, seemed so small, yet so intricately part of this vast, unfolding pattern. You can be a bridge. A translator. The ice recedes, but consciousness can connect. Was this what happened to surveyors who went native or succumbed to desert madness, in other legends? Had they touched upon similar nodes of ancient, planetary consciousness? Lena, Bjorn, Soren, it's been an honor, Ivar said, his voice surprisingly calm. He felt a strange peace settling over him. The fear was gone, replaced by an overwhelming curiosity, a desire to see what came next. Tell them what we found. But tell them to be careful. Very careful. Ivar, no. Lena cried. The comms crackled with static, then cut out. He was alone. Or rather, he was with the knot. The cavern was transforming into a crucible of energy. The ice was melting away with astonishing speed, not just from the knot's heat, but from some internal resonance that was shaking it apart. The structure itself was beginning to glow, not just pulse, its dark surface now shot through with veins of light that mirrored the glyphs on the disappearing walls. The water rose around him. Hot now. He should have been scalded, but he felt no pain, only an intense, energizing warmth. He dropped his sample kit, his helmet. The air was breathable, charged. He looked into the heart of the glowing knot, and it looked back into him. He saw the lines that sing, the true cartography, not of sand, but of ice, of planetary energy fields, of consciousness itself. He was no longer just Ivar Lund, geophysicist. He was becoming something more, or perhaps something less defined. A conduit. A listener. The last of the ice cavern collapsed inwards, not in a chaotic crush, but as if dematerializing, the water flashing into superheated steam, then vanishing. He found himself suspended in a space that was not a space, surrounded by the radiant, intricate energy of the knot. His physical body felt distant, unimportant. His thoughts, his consciousness, were merging with the vast, ancient awareness of the object. He felt the other nodes across the planet stir in their ancient slumber. He felt the subtle shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, the hum of the deep mantle currents, the silent language of the cosmos. He was a grain of sand, yes, but a grain that had become aware of the entire beach, the entire ocean, the entire universe. He was Ivar Lund. And he was the frozen knot. Underscore 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 underscore. Epilogue. The official report stated that Station Nordvest was lost due to a sudden, unexplained geothermal event leading to catastrophic ice sheet destabilization. The seismic activity was unprecedented, registering on instruments worldwide before all telemetry from the station abruptly ceased. Rescue teams, arriving weeks later when conditions permitted, found a vast, chaotic crater where the station had been, miles wide, the ice fractured and melted in bizarre, geometric patterns that defied geological explanation. Of Dr. Ivar Lund and his team, no trace was ever found. Soren Larsen, Lena Hansen, and Bjorn Eriksson were presumed to have perished instantly. Ivar Lund was listed as missing, presumed dead deep within the ice. The Echo Deep project was quietly shelved, the data classified, the area declared a permanent exclusion zone. But sometimes, on clear, cold nights, when the aurora borealis danced its silent, ethereal ballet across the polar sky, sensitive radio telescopes aimed at the heavens would pick up faint, rhythmic pulses emanating from the desolate heart of northeastern Greenland. Pulses that, when analyzed, revealed incredibly complex mathematical structures, almost like a language. And in the deeper silences, in the quiet hum of the earth itself, some who knew how to listen, the mystics, the deep dreamers, the ones attuned to the subtle currents of the world, would claim to hear a new voice in the ancient chorus. A voice that spoke of ice and stars, of vast networks and slow awakenings. A voice that sometimes, very faintly, whispered a human name, Ivar. He had not escaped. He had not been destroyed. He had, in a way only the universe could orchestrate, completed his survey. He had mapped the lines, not on paper, but in consciousness. He had become a cartographer of the unseen, a knot in the frozen heart of the world, waiting for the next thaw, the next connection, the next verse in the song of the deep earth. The Zagros Mountains clawed at the sky, their peaks a jagged, indifferent gray against the piercing azure. Søren Marabani, a man whose life was delineated by the precise language of mathematics and the tangible reality of rock and soil, felt a familiar knot of professional skepticism tighten in his chest. For 2 weeks, the analysts at Tehran's National Cartographic Center had buzzed about the anomaly, a slender, impossibly tall structure that had materialized on the latest high-resolution satellite imagery, deep within an uninhabited, treacherous pass known locally as Daryi Gamshode, the Lost Valley. Søren, chief topographer and senior engineer, was the NCC's designated debunker of digital ghosts and sensor phantoms. 42 years old, with a mind as sharp as the granite shards littering the slopes around him, he trusted instruments, data, and verifiable observation. A tower where no tower had ever been. Preposterous. Yet, the satellite passes were consistent. 3 different spectral analyses confirmed a vertical anomaly with a distinct thermal signature, albeit one that fluctuated oddly. His government-issued land cruiser, scarred from countless expeditions, had groaned its way up the barely there track, leaving the last vestiges of pastoral life far below. Now, at his rudimentary base camp, a reinforced all-weather tent, an array of solar panels, and a humming suite of surveying equipment, he prepared for the final ascent to the coordinates pinpointed by the satellites. The air was thin here, biting with an alpine chill even under the relentless sun. Just a geological fluke exaggerated by atmospheric lensing, he'd muttered to his director, Amir, over the crackling radio the night before. Or perhaps a particularly ambitious shepherd's folly. Amir's voice, usually jovial, had been strained. Verify, Surin. On-site visual and tactile verification. The preliminary reports are insistent. The hike was arduous. The coordinates led him to a broad, wind-scoured plateau, a stark amphitheater of rock cradled by towering peaks. He swept the area with his high-powered Leica binoculars. Nothing. Just scree, hardy alpine scrub clinging to crevices, and the endless, desolate beauty of the high Zagros. His GPS unit, a military-grade model, flickered, its signal jumping erratically before settling on the designated spot. He stood, precisely where the satellite image indicated the base of this phantom tower should be. Then, it began. A subtle wave of nausea, followed by a profound, disorienting vertigo that made the mountains themselves seem to tilt and sway. Surin, a man who'd scaled sheer cliffs without a tremor, stumbled, bracing himself against a boulder. Simultaneously, an almost suffocating sense of déjà vu enveloped him. Not a fleeting recognition, but a deep, cellular certainty that he had stood in this exact spot, felt this same thin wind, seen these same clouds scudding across this same sky, countless times before, in a life he couldn't recall. He shook his head, attributing it to the altitude, the exertion, the sheer mental irritation of a wild goose chase. He meticulously set up his portable theodolite, recalibrated his GPS, checked his analog compass, its needle quivered, sluggish and uncertain, a highly unusual behavior for the reliable instrument. Frustration gnawed at him. He was a scientist, not a mystic. There was no tower. He began a systematic grid search, walking slowly, his gaze raking every inch of the ground, every conceivable line of sight. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then began its slow descent. He was about to radio in a definitive, nothing found, sensor error highly probable, when a perverse flicker of curiosity, the same instinct that had made him a top-tier surveyor, prompted him. The satellite data, despite its current inexplicable invisibility on the ground, had been precise about the structure's perimeter. He extended his hand, palm open, into the empty air where the imagery had mapped the tower's edge. His fingers met a surface. Cool. Smooth. Unyieldingly solid. Surin froze, his breath lodging in his throat like a shard of ice. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the vast silence. He pushed. The surface didn't give. It felt like polished obsidian, or perhaps a strange, cold, unidentifiable metal, utterly devoid of texture yet palpably real. His mind, trained in the tangible, reeled. He ran his hand along the invisible plane, tracing its vertical ascent as high as he could reach, then moving sideways, feeling the distinct, sharp curve of a colossal cylinder. He was touching it. He was touching a structure that his eyes insisted wasn't there. The vertigo returned with a vengeance, and the déjà vu deepened, no longer a vague feeling but a cascade of phantom memories, of other hands touching this same cold surface, of whispers in an unknown tongue, of an immense, patient waiting. He stumbled back, his scientific worldview shattering like brittle glass. He spent the rest of the daylight hours in a state of horrified fascination, cautiously circumnavigating the invisible structure. It was roughly 10 meters in diameter, perfectly cylindrical. He couldn't guess its height, it simply vanished into the sky, its unseen summit lost to his perception. His laser distance measurer, aimed at the felt surface, registered no return. His thermal camera showed only the ambient temperature of the air and the rock beyond. Only his own skin, his own primal sense of touch, confirmed its impossible presence. That night, his radio report to Amir was halting, choked with a disbelief that bordered on fear. "It's here," he managed, his voice hoarse. "But it's not visible. You can touch it. It's solid." There was a long, crackling silence from Tehran. Then, "Amir," his voice hushed, "continue observation, Surin. Document everything. Everything." The next morning, Surin returned to the plateau, his dread mixed with a compulsive, terrifying curiosity. He'd slept fitfully, his dreams filled with shifting geometries and whispering darkness. Before approaching the tower's felt perimeter, he took a can of bright orange survey paint and carefully marked the ground at 4 cardinal points corresponding to where he perceived its base to be. He needed a fixed reference. The tower was still there, an invisible colossus. The vertigo was now a constant companion when he was near it, a subtle disorientation that warped his spatial perception. The déjà vu had evolved into a persistent background hum, a tapestry of unlived experiences flickering at the edges of his consciousness. He spent the day attempting to take more precise measurements, using plumb lines and string, relying on the feel of the unseen surface. He sketched compulsively in his notebook, not the visible landscape, but the felt contours of the invisible structure, its perfect, impossible curvature. As dusk approached, he noticed something new. Faint, sibilant sounds, carried on the wind that sighed through the pass. At first, he dismissed it as the wind itself, playing tricks on his strained senses. But the sounds were too patterned, too rhythmic. They seemed to emanate from the direction of the tower, or perhaps from the very air around it, like whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. The following dawn, he ascended with a heavy heart. His orange paint marks were still stark against the gray rock. But they were no longer flush with the tower's base. The invisible structure had shifted. By his estimation, it had moved almost 3 meters to the northwest and rotated slightly on its axis. Silently. Impossibly. Days bled into a week. Each morning, Surin found the tower had moved again, sometimes by a few meters, sometimes by more, its slow, deliberate relocation a terrifying ballet. His advanced equipment remained stubbornly blind, his GPS often reporting his location as miles out to sea or deep within the Earth's core before failing entirely in the tower's proximity. His older, analog tools, while less erratic, still hinted at subtle distortions in the local space-time fabric. One blustery afternoon, seeking shelter from a biting wind in a shallow cave near the tower's current position, his boots scuffed against something soft wedged deep within a fissure. He pulled it out, a small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and water-stained, but the ink, a faded sepia, still largely legible. It was written in elegant, old-fashioned Farsi. The first entry was dated, 1332 SH, 1953 by the Gregorian calendar. The author identified himself as Abbas Kiani, an engineer with a national survey team. Surin's blood ran cold as he read. Kiani's initial entries were meticulously scientific, detailing geological formations and topographical challenges, mirroring Surin's own professional mindset. Then, the tone began to shift. Kiani wrote of discovering a disturbance, a void in the expected, then, a structure not of stone or site, but of pure geometric intent. He described the same overwhelming vertigo, the profound déjà vu, the tactile confirmation of an invisible edifice. "It hums," Kiani had written, his script growing slightly less controlled, not with sound, but with a pressure on the mind, a silent song of its existence. Kiani, too, had tried to map it, to understand its nightly translocations. "It dances to a rhythm older than these mountains," one passage read, a celestial clockwork. "It is the mountain's dream made manifest, or perhaps its architect." The entries became increasingly erratic, filled with strange symbols and philosophical musings. "The lines of force are not of this world," Kiani wrote. "It reshapes what is real, drawing new boundaries for existence. It calls for a new cartography. The final entries were fragmented, almost frantic. The whispers are a language, it teaches. I must learn its grammar, follow its true dimension. The last discernible sentence read, the tower is a key, and the mountain is the lock. I will walk its true path. Surin closed the journal, his hands trembling. He was not the first. The whispers around him seemed to intensify, swirling with the wind, and now he could almost discern fragments, echoes of Kiani's words, phrases from his own recent thoughts spoken aloud in the solitude of his camp, as if the air itself was recording and replaying his existence. The sensory distortions escalated. The pure mountain water from his canteen sometimes tasted of metallic dust. The scent of ancient, unidentifiable spices, cardamom, frankincense, something else wild and unknown, would drift on the wind, though nothing but rock and ice surrounded him for miles. Atop a high dune overlooking the plateau, he'd sometimes feel an immense, crushing pressure, as if he were fathoms deep underwater. He returned to his own meticulous plotting of the tower's daily positions. On his graph paper, a pattern was emerging. The tower wasn't moving randomly. Its nightly shifts, when mapped over days, were tracing a slow, deliberate curve, part of a vast, complex spiral, or perhaps a segment of an enormous, unreadable glyph being painstakingly inscribed upon the face of the plateau. The very landscape seemed to hold its breath, complicit in this silent, monumental undertaking. One evening, as the sun bled a fiery orange across the snow-capped peaks, a palpable thrum resonated from the invisible tower, a silent, powerful pulse that vibrated deep within Surin's bones. The whispers, which had been a constant, unsettling susurrus, suddenly coalesced, sharpening into a clear, chorus-like directive that resonated not in his ears, but directly within his mind. It wasn't Farsi, nor any human language he recognized, yet its meaning was utterly, terrifyingly unambiguous. Measure. Record. Understand the unseen. Complete the equation. The old lines fade. The new lines must be drawn. Surin stood before the invisible monolith, the wind tearing at his clothes, his carefully constructed reality a ruin at his feet. The compulsion was overwhelming, not a command from an external force, but an upwelling from the deepest part of his being. He was an engineer. He was a cartographer. His entire life had been dedicated to understanding and delineating the world. This tower, this impossible, shifting edifice, was presenting him with a new kind of blueprint, a different order of existence, a challenge that dwarfed all his previous undertakings. He thought of Abbas Kiani's final, serene words, the lines are now clear. I will walk its true dimension. To truly map this place, to engineer a comprehension of its terrifying, beautiful logic, meant surrendering his old certainties, stepping beyond the known laws of physics, into the dreaming heart of the mountain. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overlaid with a profound, almost sacred sense of purpose. This was not madness. This was discovery, in its most elemental, terrifying form. He did not radio Tehran that night, nor the next. He abandoned his attempts to use the defunct high-tech instruments. Instead, he retrieved his oldest, most fundamental tools, his finest German drawing pencils, rolls of archival vellum, his grandfather's brass sextant, a meticulously cared-for chronometer, his most trusted compasses that still, somehow, responded with a degree of accuracy away from the tower's immediate influence. For weeks that blurred into an indeterminate passage of time, Surin Marabani became the tower's devoted scribe. He rose before dawn, his senses preternaturally sharpened, feeling for the tower's new position, its subtle shifts in perceived temperature, the almost imperceptible alterations in the pressure it exerted on the air around it. He meticulously documented its slow, deliberate movements, triangulating its position against distant, stable peaks, using the stars at night when the skies were clear. His notebooks filled with complex diagrams that owed more to esoteric geometry than standard topography. He derived equations that seemed to bend the known rules of mathematics, attempting to model the forces that governed the tower's existence and its stately dance across the plateau. He sketched the patterns the whispers seemed to form in the air, the subtle interplay of light and shadow that sometimes, for fleeting moments, hinted at the tower's ethereal form. He ate little, slept less, fueled by an intellectual fervor that bordered on ecstatic obsession. The tower was his universe now, its silent, invisible presence the axis around which his world revolved. He was no longer just Surin Marabani, topographer. He was becoming something else, an acolyte of an alien geometry, a student of a silent, cosmic engineering. When the relief team, dispatched after nearly a month of Surin's complete radio silence and increasingly bizarre, fragmented data bursts prior to that, finally battled their way to the Dar-e Gamshode, they found his base camp eerily tidy, almost reverently organized. His land cruiser was parked neatly, covered by a tarpaulin. Inside his tent, his sleeping bag was rolled, his personal effects stored. On his sturdy folding camp table, weighted down by a smooth, dark river stone, lay a thick sheaf of vellum sheets. They were covered in astonishingly detailed drawings and calculations, far beyond the scope of a standard topographical survey. They depicted the ghost tower, in myriad projections, charted its spiraling path across the plateau with breathtaking precision, and detailed its relationship to celestial alignments Surin had somehow divined. The final page was a stunningly intricate diagram of the entire plateau, with the tower's projected path forming a complex, beautiful, and utterly alien symbol, a map not of what was, but of what was becoming. Of Surin Marabani, there was no trace. Only his footprints leading towards the last recorded position of the invisible tower, and then, nothing. His own journal lay beside the vellum maps. The last entry, penned in a steady, remarkably clear hand, read, "The architecture is almost complete. It is not built by hands, but revealed by adherence to principles I am only now beginning to perceive. The mountain does not dream the tower teaches the mountain how to dream. I have been invited to observe the next phase of its unfolding, to witness the true lines as they are drawn across the fabric of what will be. The equations are resolving. The lines are clear now. I see." The official report from the National Cartographic Center discreetly omitted the vellum maps and Surin's final journal entries. Surin Marabani was listed as lost, presumed dead, victim of extreme environmental exposure and probable psychological breakdown due to prolonged isolation in a hazardous high-altitude environment. The Dar-e Gamshode sector was declared permanently off-limits, citing unstable geological conditions and unpredictable electromagnetic interference. Yet, within the most classified archives of the NCC, Surin's impossible maps were locked away, a testament to a mystery too profound to acknowledge. And sometimes, on the clearest nights, when the new generation of satellites passed over the remote Zagros, their sophisticated sensors would still register that faint, inexplicable anomaly, a slender, impossibly tall tower, invisible to any eye, diligently continuing its slow, silent work of re-engineering reality, perhaps now with a new, unseen, and entirely understanding observer tracing its every move. The immense, sun-drenched silence of the Namib Desert was a familiar embrace to Dr. Miriam Adisher. At 41, with eyes that had traced ancient pathways across half the globe, she was a leading expert in historical route systems. Her current obsession, however, was less a route and more an enigma, a faint, almost apologetic line on a brittle German colonial map dated 1907, annotated in spidery Gothic script as Tunnel unter den Dünen, Zugang unsicher. Tunnel under the dunes, access uncertain. For over a century, it had been dismissed as a cartographer's fantasy, a misinterpretation, or perhaps a quickly abandoned, sand-swallowed folly of the Kaiserreich. No subsequent survey had ever found it. Miriam, funded by a private grant from a German historical society keen on reconciling its colonial past, had been in the Namib for 3 weeks. Her camp was a solitary Land Rover, heavily modified for desert survival, a small, heat-reflective tent, and an array of sensitive ground-penetrating radar equipment that had, so far, revealed nothing but endless sand, bedrock, and the occasional desiccated acacia root. The 1907 map, painstakingly digitized and overlaid onto modern satellite imagery, offered tantalizing clues, alignments with distant, unmoving Inselbergs, subtle depressions that could, with a generous imagination, suggest subsidence. She was on the verge of admitting defeat, the desert's vastness threatening to swallow her resolve along with the legendary tunnel. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning its merciful descent, painting the towering apricot dunes in hues of fire and blood. She'd stopped the Land Rover atop a high dune, seeking a vantage point indicated by a convergence of topographical lines on the old map. The air was still, heavy, the heat radiating upwards in shimmering waves. And then she saw it. Not an obvious entrance, but a shadow. A perfectly linear shadow in a place where the shifting curves of the dunes should have allowed none. It was nestled at the base of a colossal star dune, an almost imperceptible darkening, as if the sand itself had recoiled slightly from something hidden. Her heart hammered. Could it be? Leaving the vehicle, she scrambled down the dune's slip face, the sand hot even through her sturdy boots. As she neared the shadow, the temperature dropped, not gradually, but with an almost shocking suddenness, as if stepping through an invisible curtain. The air here was cool, almost cold, carrying the faintest scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old. The shadow resolved into a dark opening, partially obscured by a recent fall of sand, a perfectly arched tunnel mouth, framed by discolored, but remarkably intact, brickwork. German engineering, unmistakably. Her breath caught. It was real. Her satellite phone, she knew, would have no signal this deep amongst the dunes, nestled against rock. She was alone with this discovery. With trembling hands, she retrieved a powerful LED headlamp and a backup flashlight from her pack. The tunnel plunged into darkness, its floor a mix of compacted sand and what felt like flagstones. It was surprisingly wide, high enough for a man on horseback. The air grew cooler with every step, a profound, almost subterranean chill that was utterly alien to the scorched desert outside. A few meters in, the silence became absolute, the oppressive weight of the dunes above pressing down on her senses. Yet, it wasn't a dead silence. There was a faint, almost subaudible hum, a thrumming that seemed to vibrate in her bones rather than her ears. She checked her watch, 17:23. The tunnel seemed to slope gently downwards. The brickwork was astonishingly preserved, the mortar largely intact. After perhaps 50 meters, she found the first anomaly. Lying neatly against the wall, as if recently set down, was a rusted pickaxe and a shovel, their wooden handles smooth but not rotted. Beside them, a canvas water bag, still faintly damp to the touch, and smelling not of mildew but of fresh, cool water. She touched it hesitantly, the canvas felt new, pliable. Further on, the hum intensified. She came to a small alcove, clearly man-made. Inside, a leather satchel lay open. Miriam's light fell upon its contents, a tin of what looked like British biscuits, the painted label bright and unscratched, a small, silver-plated compass whose needle spun lazily, refusing to settle, and a slim, leather-bound diary. Her fingers, encased in thin gloves, trembled as she picked up the diary. The leather was supple, the pages creamy, not yellowed or brittle. The ink was a vivid blue-black. The first entry was dated, 14. My 1912. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, it began, in neat, cursive German. We have re-established the entrance. Hauptmann Vogel believes this tunnel is key to a new strategic supply line, bypassing the usual patrols. The air within is remarkably cool. Supplies seem preserved. Miriam's blood ran cold. 1912, these items were over a century old, yet they looked, felt, even smelled as if they'd been left here only days, perhaps weeks, ago. She glanced at her watch, 17:28. Only 5 minutes had passed. It felt like she'd been in here for at least half an hour. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Time flows strangely. She read on, her light tracing Richter's elegant script. He wrote of the tunnel's curious properties, the way provisions never spoiled, the way wounds seemed to heal faster within its cool embrace, yet also a growing disorientation among the men. Eric complained today his pocket watch has stopped, one entry read. Mine seems to run slow. The days outside pass with a confusing rapidity when viewed from the entrance. Some men are reluctant to leave the tunnel's sanctuary. Miriam continued deeper, the beam of her headlamp cutting a swathe through the darkness. The tunnel began to widen, opening into a larger chamber, almost a cavern, supported by massive, brick-lined pillars. Here, the hum was stronger, a palpable vibration. And here, the relics of the past were more numerous, more personal. A child's wooden doll, its painted eyes staring blankly, lay on a neatly folded blanket. Miriam knew the stories, families of settlers, traders, indigenous people, who had vanished without a trace in this unforgiving part of the Namib over the decades, even into the mid-20th century. She recognized the style of the doll, it was more typical of the 1930s or 40s. Beside it, a woman's tortoiseshell comb, a few strands of auburn hair still caught in its teeth. A pair of spectacles, one lens cracked, lay next to a dog-eared copy of Die Leiden de Jungenwerther. These items weren't just preserved, they felt, paused. As if their owners had merely stepped away for a moment. She found another journal, this one a cheap, lined notebook, its cover emblazoned with the logo of a Swakopmund trading company, dated 1958. The handwriting was a shaky English. My name is Thomas Ashton. Prospector. Followed the old tales. Found the tunnel. Lost my companions, or they lost me. The days don't make sense. Food lasts. But I can't seem to leave. The sun outside is too harsh now. Too fast. The final entry was a single, desperate scrawl, Helen. Are you still out there? Miriam felt a wave of profound disorientation, a creeping dread that had little to do with the darkness. This tunnel wasn't just a relic, it was a trap. A beautifully preserved, timeless prison. She looked at her watch again, 1733. It felt like an eternity. The air was thick with the silent stories of those who had come before, their hopes, their despair, frozen in these pristine artifacts. She had to get out. But the compulsion to explore further, to understand the source of the hum, the nature of this temporal anomaly, was a powerful lure. The tunnel seemed to breathe around her, its cool air a deceptive comfort. Driven by a need for answers that warred with a primal urge to flee, she pushed deeper, towards the source of the hum. The tunnel ended, or rather, opened into a vast, natural-looking cavern. The walls here weren't bricked but were of a strange, dark, crystalline rock that seemed to absorb the light from her headlamp. In the center of the cavern, the hum was a deep, resonant thrum, and the air was icy cold. There was no machinery, no obvious source. Just the rock, and the unsettling feeling that the rock itself was alive. That it was the source of this temporal distortion. Scattered around this central cavern were more items, almost like offerings. A Herrero doll, intricately beaded. A set of surveyor's tools from the 1970s, gleaming as if brand new. And, chillingly, a modern digital camera, its battery icon inexplicably full, lying beside a neatly folded, brightly colored windbreaker that looked like it could have been bought last year. Miriam backed away, her scientific curiosity overwhelmed by a sudden, visceral fear. This place didn't just preserve, it collected. It waited. She turned and fled, her boots echoing unnaturally loudly in the narrow passage. The journey back seemed to take an age, every shadow playing tricks on her eyes. She passed the alcove with Richter's diary, the child's doll, the prospector's desperate scrawls. Each item was a silent accusation, a warning. When she finally saw the faint, distant glow of the tunnel entrance, she almost wept with relief. She burst out into the dusk, gasping. The desert air, though still warm, felt searingly hot after the tunnel's chill. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, stars beginning to prick the darkness. She looked at her watch. 17:45, 12 minutes. 12 minutes in real time. Inside, it had felt like hours, a lifetime. Shaking, she scrambled back to the Land Rover. Her hands fumbled with the ignition. As the engine roared to life, she risked one last look back. The entrance was already indistinct, the shadows deepening, the sand beginning to whisper across the opening as if eager to reclaim its secret. Miriam drove through the night, guided by her GPS and the cold light of the stars, putting as much distance as possible between herself and that timeless place. She didn't stop until she reached the small, dusty outpost of AUS, well after dawn. Her report to the Historical Society was carefully worded. She confirmed the existence of a German-era tunnel, remarkably well preserved due to unique microclimatic conditions. She detailed its approximate dimensions and location, but omitted the temporal anomalies, the pristine artifacts spanning decades, the chilling sense of a place outside of time. Who would believe her? They'd call it desert madness, the product of isolation and an overactive imagination. She kept only one thing from the tunnel, Klaus Richter's diary. Back in her university office in Berlin weeks later, under the normal, unforgiving flow of time, the diary began to change. The leather stiffened and cracked. The pages yellowed, growing brittle at the edges. The vivid ink faded. Within a month, it looked exactly as a century-old document exposed to the elements should. The tunnel's preservative magic did not extend beyond its reach. Miriam Adisher continued her work, but the desert had changed her. She'd touched a place where time itself had frayed, where the past lay waiting, pristine and patient. Sometimes, in the quiet of her archives, surrounded by the dusty scent of old maps and forgotten histories, she would feel a phantom chill, hear a faint, subaudible hum, and the meticulously ordered lines of her world would blur, just for a moment, with the impossible memory of the tunnel under the Namibian dunes. She knew the desert kept its secrets well, and that particular secret, she suspected, was best left undisturbed, a silent, timeless trap waiting for its next unwitting visitor. And so, Miriam's journey into the sands of time comes to a close, or perhaps, a new understanding has just begun. The desert keeps its secrets, and the lines it draws are not always for us to comprehend, especially when those lines stretch not just across space, but through the very fabric of time itself. As you drift off, perhaps you'll feel the slight coolness on the edge of a forgotten memory, a place where moments are held forever. Sleep well, and may your own maps always lead you to safe harbors. Until next time. Kenji Tanaka adjusted the intricate settings on his telephoto lens, his breath misting faintly in the pre-dawn chill. For 3 weeks, the renowned wildlife photographer had been camped in this remote stretch of the Dornet Imag, a sea of rolling grassland that stretched unbroken to every horizon. His quarry was the elusive Pallas's cat, a creature as shy and enigmatic as the steppe itself. He knew its habits, its favored hunting grounds, and the patient stillness required to capture its fleeting presence. The previous day had been like any other, hours of waiting, the vast silence broken only by the sigh of the wind through the tall grass and the distant cry of a steppe eagle. The horizon had been a clean, unbroken line, the same line he'd photographed countless times to mark the passing of light. But this morning, as the first hint of rose and gold bled into the eastern sky, something was utterly, impossibly different. Silhouetted against the nascent dawn, where only yesterday there had been nothing but waving grass, stood a city. Kenji blinked, rubbed his eyes, then stared through his binoculars. It was no mirage, no trick of the light, though it possessed an ethereal, dreamlike quality. He could make out towers, slender, impossibly tall spires that seemed to pierce the clouds, and what looked like massive, crenellated walls. Details were indistinct in the low light, but the sheer scale of it was breathtaking, dwarfing anything he knew to exist in this sparsely populated region. It shimmered slightly, as if viewed through a heat haze, yet the air was bitingly cold. His heart hammered against his ribs. He checked his GPS, his maps. There was no city marked here, no record of any significant settlement, ancient or modern. He'd flown over this area in a small chartered plane only a month ago, nothing. Driven by a mixture of disbelief and an irresistible photographer's instinct, Kenji abandoned his vigil for the Pallas's cat. He packed a day bag, water, rations, extra batteries, his smaller camera, and began to walk towards the impossible metropolis. The rising sun cast its structures in sharper relief, revealing intricate facades and strange, geometric patterns that glinted as if made of polished stone or metal. He walked for what felt like an hour, the city remaining stubbornly on the horizon. It was, he estimated, perhaps 10 kilometers away. He pressed on, the dry grass crunching under his boots. After another hour, he paused, frustrated. The city seemed no closer. If anything, it looked even more distant, its details fading slightly as the sun climbed higher. It was like chasing a rainbow. He remembered his drone, a high-end quadcopter equipped with a powerful camera. Back at his camp, he retrieved it. This would settle it. He launched the drone, sending it soaring towards the horizon. On his controller's screen, the city appeared with startling clarity, sharp, defined, undeniably real. He pushed the drone forward, gaining altitude for a better overview. The signal was strong. Then, as it neared what he judged to be the city's outer perimeter, the video feed fractured into a kaleidoscope of static, and a moment later, the connection died. Signal lost. Telemetry lost. The drone did not return. A cold dread trickled down Kenji's spine. He had a smaller, older drone, a backup. Hesitantly, he sent it up. This time, he kept it at a lower altitude, approaching more cautiously. Again, the city appeared on screen, its silent towers beckoning. And again, as it crossed an invisible threshold, the signal vanished. The drone was gone. 2 drones, thousands of dollars of equipment, swallowed by an enigma. For the rest of the day, Kenji observed the city from a distance, through his most powerful lens. It remained, shimmering, beautiful, and utterly inaccessible. As dusk approached, its silhouette darkened against the fiery sunset, then slowly faded into the deepening twilight, though he could still perceive its immense, dark mass against the star-dusted sky. He returned to his camp, deeply unsettled, his mind a whirlwind of impossible questions. He ate little, sleep eluding him for hours. The silence of the steppe, usually a comfort, now felt pregnant with unseen possibilities. He finally drifted into an uneasy slumber, his dreams filled with shifting skylines and silent, watching towers. Kenji awoke with a gasp. The air was different. Still. Cold. And utterly silent. He wasn't in his tent. He was lying on a smooth, cool surface, like polished stone. Above him, instead of the familiar canvas of his tent, loomed a colossal, arching ceiling of the same dark material, disappearing into shadows far overhead. He sat up, his heart pounding. He was inside. He was inside the city. He had no memory of moving, no recollection of leaving his tent, no idea how he had traversed the miles that had separated him from this place. His boots were gone, his feet bare on the cold stone. He was still in his thermal underwear and fleece jacket. His day pack lay beside him, inexplicably. He stood, looking around. He was in a vast, circular chamber. The walls were seamless, curving upwards, made of the same dark, light-absorbing stone. There were no windows, no obvious doors, yet the chamber was dimly illuminated by a faint, ambient luminescence that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. Strange, intricate symbols, unlike any script he knew, were subtly etched into the walls, almost invisible until the light caught them at certain angles. The air was still, carrying no scent, no dust. The silence was absolute, profound, as if sound itself could not penetrate these walls. Panic warred with a strange, detached curiosity. He checked his pack. His camera was there, his water bottle, his emergency rations. His satellite phone, predictably, showed no signal. His compass spun uselessly. He had to find a way out. He began to walk, his bare feet making no sound on the stone floor. He chose an arbitrary direction along the curving wall. After a while, he came to an opening, a perfect archway leading into another chamber, similar to the first but smaller. And then another, a labyrinth of interconnected, silent spaces. Some were vast, others intimate. All were empty, built of the same dark, seamless stone, adorned with the same alien glyphs. There were no signs of life, no furniture, no tools, no refuse. It was a city of ghosts, or perhaps a city that had never known inhabitants. He walked for what felt like hours, the unchanging architecture, the oppressive silence, and the dim, even light creating a profound sense of disorientation. He lost all track of time. His watch seemed to have stopped, though he was sure its battery had been fresh. In one vast, echoing hall, he saw something glinting in the dim light. He approached cautiously. There, lying on the stone floor, was his first drone. Or what was left of it. Its plastic casing was cracked and brittle, its metal components corroded as if they had been exposed to harsh elements for decades, not mere hours. Yet, lying beside it, pristine and untouched, was the small memory card. Further on, in another chamber, he found his second drone, in a similar state of advanced decay. Its memory card, too, was miraculously intact. With trembling fingers, he retrieved the cards. What would they show? He found what might have been a thoroughfare, a wide, long corridor that stretched into the gloom. He followed it, hoping it would lead to an exit, to the outside world. But it only led to more chambers, more silent, empty spaces. The city seemed infinite, a Mobius strip of alien architecture. He began to feel a strange lethargy, a subtle pull to simply sit, to stop, to become part of the city's immense silence. The air, though cool, felt heavy, pressing. He fought it, taking sips of water, forcing himself to keep moving. Then, he saw it, a flicker of movement, or perhaps a change in the light, at the far end of a long gallery. He hurried towards it, hope flaring. As he drew closer, he realized it was an opening, and through it, he saw grass. Blue sky. He stumbled through the archway, his eyes aching from the sudden brightness. He was outside. He stood on the step, the familiar wind cool on his face. He turned. Behind him, where a moment ago there had been an archway of dark stone, there was now nothing but waving grass. The city was gone. Vanished as if it had never been. He looked around, disoriented. His camp was nowhere in sight. He checked his GPS, it flickered to life, giving him a reading. He was miles from where he'd made camp, in a part of the steppe he didn't recognize. It took him the rest of that day, guided by his GPS, to stagger back to his campsite. His tent was still there, his Land Rover, everything as he had left it. It was as if he'd simply woken up from a vivid, terrifying dream. But the drone memory cards in his pocket were real. Back in Japan, weeks later, he finally dared to view the footage. The first drone's card showed its flight towards the shimmering city, then, as it crossed the invisible perimeter, the image dissolved into a maelstrom of kaleidoscopic light and impossible, shifting geometries before going dark. The second drone captured a similar sequence, but for a few fleeting seconds before the feed cut, it showed a glimpse inside, towering, seamless structures, dark, unfamiliar angles, and cityscape utterly alien, bathed in that same faint, internal luminescence he had experienced. Kenji Tanaka never photographed the palace's cat that year. He submitted a truncated report to his sponsors, citing equipment failure and adverse conditions. He never spoke of the city to anyone, fearing ridicule, or worse. But he kept the memory cards. He would look at the impossible footage late at night, the images burning themselves into his mind. The city wasn't a mirage. It was real, in its own way. It existed, somewhere, somewhen, touching his world for a fleeting moment. It had shown itself to him, taken him in, and then released him, for reasons he would never understand. He was its witness. His photographs, the few he'd dared to take inside with his handheld camera before his escape, showed only blurred, dark shapes and those unreadable glyphs, beautiful, terrifying, and utterly inexplicable. The city had allowed him to document it, but only on its own terms. And so, Kenji's encounter with the city that wasn't there at dawn remains a fragile, unsettling memory, a testament to the thin veil between our perceived reality and the vast, unknowable possibilities that lie just beyond the horizon. As you drift off, perhaps you'll glimpse your own impossible skylines on the edge of sleep. Sleep well, and may your own maps always lead you to familiar, comforting shores. Until next time. Omar Hassan considered himself a connoisseur of illusions. For the past 15 years, the documentary videographer, now in his late 30s, had chased phantoms across the globe, auroras, Brocken specters, bioluminescent bays. His current project, Ephemeral Vistas, The Illusions of the Sahara, had brought him to the Taensraft Basin, the land of thirst, a notoriously desolate and flat expanse where mirages danced with an almost sentient mockery. He was a patient man, accustomed to the solitude and the searing, indifferent sun. His heavily modified Land Cruiser was his home and his studio, packed with cameras, solar panels, water tanks, and his most prized piece of equipment, Icarus, a state-of-the-art drone with an ultra-high-definition camera capable of withstanding the desert's punishing conditions. For weeks, Omar had been capturing Fata Morganas, those complex superior mirages that could make distant dunes appear as castles or shimmering lakes. He'd rise before dawn, drive to a promising location where the temperature gradients were likely to be extreme, and send Icarus soaring. The drone offered perspectives he could never achieve from the ground, its lens piercing the shimmering veils of heat. The first anomaly was subtle, easily dismissed. He'd been filming a classic inferior mirage. A stretch of sand appeared to be a vast, shimmering lake, with the distant, skeletal acacia trees seemingly reflected in its non-existent waters. Later that evening, reviewing the footage in the cool sanctuary of his vehicle, he noticed something odd. The reflection of one specific acacia tree in the mirage wasn't quite right. The real tree was gnarled and mostly bare. The reflected tree, however, seemed to have a large, dark bird's nest tucked into its upper branches, a nest that definitely wasn't there in reality. Sensor flare, he muttered, shrugging it off. Or pixel bleed from the heat distortion. 3 days later, driving past that same acacia tree, he saw it, a substantial new nest, precisely where the mirage reflection had shown it. A pair of desert owls stared down at him. A chill traced its way down Omar's spine despite the oppressive heat. Coincidence? It had to be. A week passed. He was filming a particularly vivid mirage over a vast salt flat. The shimmering air distorted the distant, flat horizon into what looked like a range of low, jagged hills. When he reviewed Icarus's footage, the reflected image within the mirage, supposedly showing the underside of these illusory hills, depicted something else entirely. It showed a small convoy of 3 sand-colored Land Rovers, kicking up dust, moving from right to left. There was no such convoy visible anywhere. Omar was intrigued now, a professional curiosity piqued. He marked the location on his GPS. For days later, camped not far from that spot, he heard the distant thrum of engines. Through his binoculars, he watched, dumbfounded, as 3 sand-colored Land Rovers, belonging to a geological survey team he later met, trundled across the salt flat, moving from right to left, precisely as the sand mirror had shown. He began to actively seek out these predictive mirages. Not every mirage held them, but some, particularly those forming over specific types of terrain under precise atmospheric conditions, acted as what he started calling sand mirrors. They didn't just reflect the existing landscape in a distorted way, they reflected a future moment at that exact location, always a few days in advance. The desert wasn't just playing tricks with light, it was playing tricks with time. He captured a reflection of a sudden, violent sand squall erupting over a serene dune field. 2 days later, he was caught in that very squall, his vehicle rocking, the air thick with stinging particles, exactly as foretold. He saw a reflection of a lone fennec fox darting out from behind a specific cluster of rocks. 5 days later, while patiently waiting for sunset, the fox appeared, a fleeting ghost in the twilight. The discovery was exhilarating, terrifying. He was documenting something unprecedented, something that defied all known physics. His documentary was no longer just about optical illusions, it was about something else. Something profound and unsettling. He felt like a man staring into the very gears of fate. The days grew hotter. The sand mirrors became more frequent, or perhaps he was just getting better at finding them. He started to feel a strange connection to the desert, as if it were confiding in him, showing him its secret workings. One sweltering afternoon, he found a spectacular mirage shimmering above a stark, rocky outcrop. The air was exceptionally clear above the heat haze. He sent Icarus up, its camera feeding live video to his monitor. The mirage was strong, and within its shimmering depths, a scene began to coalesce. It was disturbingly clear, sharper than any he'd witnessed before. The reflection showed the same rocky outcrop. His own land cruiser, identifiable by the distinctive dent on its passenger door, lay on its side, wheels spinning uselessly. A plume of black smoke curled into the sky. Nearby, crumpled like a discarded toy, was Icarus. And then he saw himself. Or rather, his body. Lying a few meters from the wreck, partially shaded by an overhanging ledge of rock. Still. Too still. His distinctive red headscarf, the one he was wearing at that very moment, was stark against the pale sand. Omar's blood turned to ice. He snatched the drone controller, his hands shaking violently, and brought Icarus down immediately, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He replayed the last few seconds of footage on his monitor. There was no mistaking it. The angle, the details, his own lifeless form. It was a clear, unambiguous vision of his own death, here, at this very spot. He looked at the date stamp on the drone's recording. He instinctively knew the sand mirrors showed events roughly 3 to 5 days in the future. He had, at most, 5 days. For the first time in weeks, he felt an overwhelming urge to flee. To pack up, drive north, and never look back. To abandon his documentary, his discovery, everything. But another part of him, the obsessive documentarian, the seeker of truth, was horribly, morbidly transfixed. This was the ultimate story. His story. He spent a sleepless night, the vision replaying endlessly in his mind. The desert silence, usually a comfort, now felt like a suffocating shroud. Could he change it? Was it a warning, or an immutable sentence? The sand mirrors had never been wrong before. They hadn't shown possibilities, they had shown what would be. The next day, he forced himself to drive away from the rocky outcrop, heading in the opposite direction. He'd put miles between himself and that place. He'd break the pattern. But the desert felt different now. Every rock, every dune, seemed to hold a latent menace. The sun felt like an accuser. He drove for 2 days, a gnawing anxiety his constant companion. He avoided filming, avoided looking for mirages. But on the 3rd day, a strange compulsion began to take hold. What if he was meant to see it? What if trying to avoid it was pointless, or worse, would somehow precipitate it in a different, unexpected way? He was a chronicler, a witness. Wasn't it his duty, his curse, to see this through? The internal debate raged. By the dawn of the 4th day after the vision, the compulsion had become an unbearable weight. He found himself turning the land cruiser back, drawn by an invisible thread towards the rocky outcrop, towards his prescripted doom. He told himself he was going to disprove it, to defy fate. But deep down, he knew he was going to document it. He drove slowly, meticulously checking his vehicle, his tires, his awareness heightened to an almost painful degree. He wouldn't be reckless. He would control every variable he could. As he neared the outcrop, its familiar silhouette stark against the pale sky, a strange calm settled over him. He parked the land cruiser a safe distance away, on flat, stable ground. He got out, his camera in hand. He scanned the area. It was exactly as in the vision, minus the wreckage. He decided to send Icarus up one last time. Not to film a mirage, but to film himself, to film the location, to create a record. He launched the drone, its whirring blades a stark intrusion in the silence. It climbed, giving him a bird's-eye view of the scene. He stood by his vehicle, camera rolling, narrating his thoughts, his fears, his strange resignation. The sun beat down. Nothing happened. An hour passed. Then another. Perhaps the vision was time-sensitive. Perhaps he'd miscalculated. A sliver of hope, fragile but persistent, began to bloom. Then, he felt it, a subtle tremor in the ground. A low rumble, growing in intensity. Not an earthquake, but something else. He looked around, puzzled. The sky was clear. The ground beneath the land cruiser, which had seemed so solid, suddenly gave way. A sinkhole, hidden just beneath a thin crust of sun-baked earth, opened up with terrifying speed. The vehicle lurched, tilted, and then, with a sickening metallic groan, toppled onto its side, sliding partially into the collapsing hole. Omar was thrown clear, hitting the ground hard, his head striking a rock. Dazed, pain flaring through his skull, he looked up. He saw his land cruiser, on its side, exactly as in the vision. He saw Icarus, its connection to the controller severed by the sudden chaos or perhaps the shock wave of the ground collapsing, spiraling out of control and crashing into the rocks nearby. He tried to move, but a searing pain shot through his leg. He could feel something warm and wet trickling down his temple. He was losing consciousness. His last coherent thought was a bitter, ironic acknowledgement: the sand mirror had been right. He had even documented his own demise, the drone and his handheld camera still recording, capturing his final moments. The desert always had the last word. When the Algerian authorities, alerted by his missed check-in with his satellite service, finally found the site days later, the scene was exactly as Omar had seen it in the sand mirror, and exactly as his own cameras had recorded it. The heat had already begun its relentless work, but the digital memory cards, recovered from the drone and his personal camera, held his final, chilling testament, the ghostly premonition in the mirage, and then, the horrifying, real-time unfolding of his own death, a perfect, closed loop of fate, etched into the silica and the silicon of the Sahara. And so, Omar's journey into the shimmering depths of the desert comes to its foreseen end. The sands keep their secrets, reflecting not just the light, but perhaps the inexorable flow of time itself. As you drift off, may your own reflections be kind, and your future paths clear of such foreboding illusions. Sleep well, and may your own maps always lead you to safe harbors. Until next time. Rustam Karamovic sighed, the grit of the Karakum coating his tongue even inside the rattling, Soviet-era UAZ van. At 53, his face was a roadmap of sun and wind, his hands calloused from decades spent wrestling with temperamental electronics. He was a radio operator, a relic from an era of vacuum tubes and crackling static, now tasked by a struggling government agency with a peculiar mission: restore communications at Station 7, an abandoned meteorological outpost deep in the desert. It had been silent for nearly 30 years, a ghost on the airwaves, its strategic importance long faded, but a recent bureaucratic whim had decided it needed to be brought back online, at least partially, for regional atmospheric data relay. The station, when he finally reached it after 2 days of brutal, off-road driving, was a forlorn sight. A cluster of sun-bleached, squat buildings, a skeletal radio mast piercing the hazy sky, and a perimeter fence mostly swallowed by encroaching dunes. Sand whispered against the corrugated iron walls like a restless spirit. Inside the main operations building, a thick layer of fine dust coated everything. The air was stagnant, tasting of decay and forgotten purpose. Rustam was a practical man. He set up his cot, powered up his portable generator, and began the painstaking process of assessing the old equipment. Much of it was hopeless, corroded beyond repair. But the main long-wave transmitter, a hulking beast of copper coils and enormous capacitors, looked surprisingly intact, a testament to over-engineered Soviet resilience. He spent a week cleaning contacts, replacing brittle wiring, coaxing life back into dormant circuits. His own modern satellite phone provided his only link to the outside world, a lifeline he used sparingly to report his slow progress. It was on the 8th night, while meticulously tuning the main receiver, that it happened. He was sweeping through the bands, listening to the usual hiss and crackle of cosmic noise, when a faint, rhythmic pulse emerged on a frequency he knew to be long defunct, a band officially decommissioned after the collapse of the Union, allocated to no one. He fine-tuned. The pulsing resolved into a voice. A calm, monotonous, digitally synthesized voice, speaking in unaccented Russian. It recited a string of numbers, paused, then repeated them. 63.5 46.7 63.51, 46.73. Rustam frowned, scribbling them down. Coordinates. He checked his detailed topographical maps. The location plotted to a barren, featureless stretch of sand about 200 kilometers to the northwest. A blank spot. No settlements, no known landmarks, not even a significant dune formation. The voice continued, cycling through different sets of coordinates, each pair leading to similarly empty patches of the Karakum when he checked them. The transmission was incredibly clear, unnaturally so for a long-wave signal supposedly traversing hundreds of kilometers of empty desert, especially on a dead frequency. There was no static, no fading, just the relentless, dispassionate voice. "Who is broadcasting this?" he muttered, running a diagnostic. The receiver was functioning perfectly. The signal was strong, originating from somewhere out there. But no registered transmitter was authorized for this band. For days, the transmissions continued, sometimes for hours, sometimes just short bursts. Always the same synthesized voice, always new coordinates that led to nothing. Rustam dutifully logged them, a growing list of enigmas. He reported it to his superiors via sat phone. They were dismissive. Atmospheric anomalies, Rustam. Interference. Focus on getting the designated transmitter online. But Rustam couldn't ignore it. The precision of the coordinates, the clarity of the signal, the deliberate nature of the broadcast, it felt purposeful. He began to notice patterns. The coordinates seemed to be slowly, systematically mapping the desert, section by section, always focusing on the most remote, unpopulated areas. One evening, as a blood-red sun sank below the razor-sharp horizon, the synthesized voice recited a new set of numbers. Tritsat, deviat, tochka trii vozian. 58 tochka 0, shiest, dot. 39.38, 58.06. Rustam's hand froze as he plotted them. His breath caught in his throat. The coordinates pointed directly to Station 7. To his current location. A profound chill settled over him, colder than any desert night. He looked around the dusty operations room, at the silent, hulking equipment. The voice on the radio continued its calm recitation, oblivious. Was this a test? A threat? Or something else entirely? He grabbed his powerful flashlight and stepped outside. The desert was vast and silent under a canopy of brilliant stars. The radio mast loomed, a dark finger pointing at the heavens. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet, the air itself felt charged, expectant. He went back inside, his unease growing. He tried to hail the mysterious broadcaster on the same frequency, using a small, auxiliary transmitter he'd managed to repair. "This is Station 7. Identify yourself." "To VY. Who are you?" Only the synthesized voice answered, continuing its litany of numbers, as if he hadn't spoken, as if he wasn't even there. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak of the old building, every sigh of the wind, sounded like a footstep, a whisper. He imagined unseen eyes watching him from the darkness of the dunes. The next morning, the transmissions had changed. The synthesized voice was still there, but now it was interspersed with other sounds. Faint, distorted snippets of music, old Soviet military marches, almost unrecognizable. Fragments of conversations in languages he didn't understand. And, most disturbingly, what sounded like his own voice, echoes of phrases he'd spoken into his sat phone days earlier, distorted and layered over each other. The station wasn't just receiving, it felt like it was listening, absorbing, and now, retransmitting fragments of its own isolated existence, or perhaps his. He became obsessed with the source. The signal was strong, but his directional antenna, even after he painstakingly calibrated it, gave him conflicting readings. Sometimes it seemed to come from the north, sometimes from the deep east, sometimes from directly above. It was as if the source was moving, or was everywhere at once. He began to neglect his primary task, his days consumed by trying to decipher the strange broadcasts. The coordinates continued, now sometimes accompanied by single, cryptic words: awaiting, activate, converge. One afternoon, while tinkering with an ancient piece of signal analysis equipment he'd found in a back room, a device designed for detecting subtle modulations in carrier waves, he picked up something else embedded within the main transmission, a subharmonic, almost subliminal. It wasn't a voice, but a complex, rhythmic pattern, like a heartbeat, or a slow, intricate code. He couldn't decipher it, but it felt intelligent. And incredibly old. His superiors were growing impatient. "Karamovic, have you made any progress with the primary transmitter? We need that data relay. These phantom signals are a distraction." But Rustam knew they weren't phantoms. They were real. And they were focused on this desolate patch of sand, on this forgotten station. He started experiencing strange sensory phenomena. The taste of static in his water. The smell of ozone when the air was still. A feeling of immense pressure, as if the atmosphere itself was thickening, when the transmissions were particularly strong. He found himself talking to the equipment, to the silent, listening station. The heartbeat signal grew stronger. One day, the synthesized voice gave a new set of coordinates, very close to the station, about 5 kilometers east, in a particularly desolate area of shifting black dunes. And then, a new word, spoken with a chilling clarity: arrival. Rustam knew he shouldn't. It was foolish, dangerous. But he had to see. He packed a small kit, water, his sat phone, though he doubted it would work out there, near whatever this was, a compass, and a flare gun. He left a note on the main console, investigating anomalous signal. Coordinates, he wrote them down. If not back by 0600, alert authorities. He knew it was a futile gesture. He drove the UAZ carefully through the treacherous dunes, the sun setting behind him. The air grew heavy, the silence more profound. As he approached the coordinates, his radio, tuned to the mystery frequency, began to emit a high-pitched whine. The synthesized voice was gone, replaced by the intense, rhythmic thrumming he'd detected earlier, now so powerful it seemed to vibrate the very chassis of the van. He stopped the UAZ on a relatively stable patch of sand. The coordinates pointed to the center of a vast, bowl-shaped depression, its sands unnaturally dark, almost black, absorbing the last rays of the dying sun. There was nothing there. Just sand. But the thrumming was intense, seeming to emanate from beneath the ground. He got out of the van, his flashlight cutting a weak beam in the gathering gloom. The air crackled with an unseen energy. He felt a powerful sense of vertigo, a disorientation far beyond what the empty landscape should induce. Then, the sand in the center of the depression began to shift. Not blown by the wind, but stirring. It domed upwards, then slowly, silently, began to retract, revealing something dark, metallic, and geometric beneath. It wasn't a structure being uncovered, it felt more like a gateway being opened. Rustam stood frozen, a primal fear gripping him. This was not Soviet technology. This was not human. The thrumming intensified, becoming a physical pressure against his chest. A faint, blue light began to emanate from the opening in the sand. He understood then. The coordinates weren't just locations, they were markers, perhaps beacons. And Station 7, with its old, powerful antenna, had become an unintentional amplifier, a focal point. He hadn't restored a weather station, he had reawakened something else. Something that had been waiting in the silent depths of the Karakum. The blue light pulsed. He felt an irresistible pull, not physical, but mental, a silent summons. He thought of the word, converge. He thought of arrival. He was the arrival. Or perhaps, he was the witness to it. He never knew what came through that shimmering portal in the black sand. His last conscious act was to raise his hand, as if in greeting or surrender. When the official recovery team finally reached station 7 weeks later, guided by the coordinates Rustam had left, they found the outpost silent once more. The main transmitter was cold. Rustam Karamovic was gone. His UAZ was found parked neatly a few kilometers east, keys in the ignition. Of the man himself, there was no trace. The depression in the black sand showed no signs of disturbance. The desert had reclaimed its secrets. The only thing out of the ordinary was the station's main logbook. Open on the console, Rustam's neat entries of coordinates and signal reports filled several pages. The final entry, however, was not in his handwriting. It was a single, perfectly drawn geometric symbol, an intricate spiral leading to a central point, a symbol that matched none known to terrestrial science. Beneath it, one word, written in the same synthesized, impersonal style as the voice from the radio, acknowledged. And so, Rustam's vigil in the silent station comes to its enigmatic close. Some places, it seems, are not meant to be reawakened, and some signals are best left unanswered. As you drift off, listen to the quiet hum of your own world, and hope that the truly silent places remain that way. Sleep well, and may your own maps always lead you to safe harbors. Until next time. Dr. Eris Thorne was a man who listened to the Earth's bones. An acoustic geologist of considerable renown, if only within the niche circles that cared about such things, he possessed an uncanny ability to interpret the subtle groans, hisses, and rumbles that emanated from deep within the planet. His colleagues often joked he could hear tectonic plates shifting their weight miles below, or diagnose a volcano's mood by the timbre of its subterranean sighs. Eris, a man of quiet intensity with eyes that seemed to reflect the grey Icelandic skies even when indoors, usually just offered a small, enigmatic smile. He wasn't in it for the accolades, but for the profound, ancient conversations he believed the Earth was constantly having, if one only knew how to listen. His current endeavor had brought him to a remote stretch of Iceland, a stark landscape of solidified lava flows, fissured plains, and the skeletal remains of ancient eruptions. Here, an extensive network of lava tubes, cavernous veins left by molten rock, riddled the earth. He was here to study volcanic sound patterns, hoping to map the acoustic signatures of these unique formations, perhaps even unlock secrets about their creation or predict future instabilities. His base was a solitary, ruggedized trailer, crammed with sophisticated recording equipment, solar panels gleaming faintly under the perpetual twilight of the Icelandic summer. Days were spent meticulously placing highly sensitive geophones and custom-built microphones deep within the labyrinthine caves. He charted their locations with GPS, cross-referencing with geological surveys, his movements precise and methodical. The caves themselves were cathedrals of cooled rock, some vast enough to swallow houses, others narrow, twisting passages. The air within was cold, still, and carried the faint, mineral scent of ancient stone. During these daylight hours, his equipment picked up the expected, the drip of condensing moisture, the faint skitter of unseen insects, the whisper of wind finding its way through unseen cracks, and the very, very low-frequency hum of the planet itself. It was on the 5th night, as he sat hunched over his monitors in the trailer, a lukewarm cup of tea beside him, that the anomaly first registered. A faint, rhythmic pulse appeared on the spectrogram, originating from sensor array gamma, deep within a section of caves he'd informally dubbed the basalt forest, due to its profusion of tall, pillar-like stalagmites and stalactites formed by dripping lava, resembling a petrified, shadowy wood. At first, Eris dismissed it. Interference, he muttered, checking his power lines. Or a distant tremor, amplified by the cave structure. But the pulse returned the next night, and the night after. It began subtly, around the time the last vestiges of sun dipped below the horizon, and faded just before dawn. It wasn't a simple seismic signature. It was structured. There were clear patterns, repetitions, variations in pitch and intensity that seemed almost deliberate. He focused all his analytical software on the signals from the basalt forest. The equipment was state-of-the-art, designed to filter out noise, to isolate the faintest acoustic phenomena. As he refined the recordings, stripping away layers of ambient sound, a chilling clarity emerged. The pulses were not just rhythmic, they were melodic. Complex harmonies wove through deep, resonant drones. Phrasings echoed and built upon each other. It was undeniably, astonishingly, like music. Alien, certainly, nothing human ears were attuned to in their raw form, but the mathematical precision, the emotional cadence, it was all there. Impossible, Eris breathed. Leaning back, his heart thrumming a counter-rhythm to the strange song filtering through his headphones. He checked for any human activity, radio transmissions, distant machinery, even esoteric artistic installations. Nothing. He was miles from any settlement, in a geologically restricted zone. Driven by a burgeoning obsession, he began the most complex analysis, attempting to correlate the sound's origin with the known geology. His software could, in theory, estimate the age of a sound source by how it interacted with and resonated through different rock strata. He ran the sequence. The computer word, crunched the data, and then displayed a result that made the hairs on Eris's arms stand on end. The report was unequivocal, yet utterly nonsensical. The acoustic signature, this strange, nocturnal melody, indicated a source material, a resonating body, that was older than the basalt rock of the lava tubes themselves. Significantly older. As if the sound was an echo from a time before the volcanoes had even erupted, before the island itself, as he knew it, had fully formed. An acoustic fossil, embedded not in stone, but in the very fabric of space within the stone. Sleep became a luxury Eris could no longer afford. His days were spent recalibrating, checking for errors, his logical mind rebelling against the data. His nights were spent in the cold embrace of the caves, specifically the basalt forest, with portable recorders, trying to pinpoint the exact source. The music was everywhere there, seeming to emanate from the glossy black columns, from the crystalline structures that glittered in his headlamp beam, from the very air itself. It was strongest here, in this petrified grove where the rock seemed to listen. The melodies grew more complex, or perhaps his perception of them sharpened. He began to discern intricate polyrhythms, soaring, flute-like overtones that sent shivers down his spine, and bass notes so profound they vibrated in his chest cavity more than his ears. It was a soundscape of immense antiquity, majestic and terrifyingly indifferent. The isolation, the strange music, the lack of sleep, they began to take their toll. Eris found himself talking to the cave formations, half expecting them to reply. He'd catch himself humming fragments of the melodies, his own thoughts becoming entangled with the ancient song. The pure, filtered water from his canteen sometimes tasted faintly of metallic dust, and the air, even outside the caves, occasionally carried the phantom scent of ozone or something else, something primal and unidentifiable. His scientific rigor warred with a creeping sense of awe, and a deeper, more unsettling feeling, that he was an intruder, eavesdropping on a secret not meant for human ears. He pored over ancient Icelandic sagas, tales of Huldufolk, the hidden people, who lived within the rocks, of primal chants that shaped the land. Once, he would have dismissed them as charming folklore. Now, they felt like hushed warnings. One night, the song was particularly intense. A new moon hung invisible in the sky, and the aurora borealis, usually a silent dancer, seemed to ripple with an unusual fervency. Eris was deep within the basalt forest, his equipment running, when a new element entered the subterranean symphony. It was a series of sharp, clicking sounds, almost like immense castanets, that interlocked with the existing melodies, creating a cadence that felt like a countdown, or a summons. And then, he felt it, a profound, physical pressure, as if the rock itself was exhaling around him. The air grew dense. His headlamp flickered erratically. The music swelled, no longer just sound but a palpable force that resonated in his bones, his teeth, the very fluid in his eyes. It felt ancient, powerful, and utterly, terrifyingly, aware. He realized, with a surge of primal fear, that the song wasn't just a recording embedded in time. It was active. It was, perhaps, conscious. And it knew he was there. The clicking intensified, and for a terrifying moment, Eris had the distinct impression that the basalt columns around him were subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifting. Not moving in a physical sense. But their resonant frequencies were changing, focusing, as if the entire chamber was tuning itself to him. That was the breaking point. The lure of discovery, the academic curiosity, vanished, replaced by a desperate need to escape. This was not science, this was something else, something vast and beyond his comprehension, something that felt like it could swallow his sanity whole, absorb him into its ancient, stony chorus. Scrambling, fumbling with his gear, Eris grabbed only his primary recorder, the one containing the clearest, most disturbing evidence of the acoustic fossils. He didn't dare try to dismantle the sensor arrays. He simply turned and fled, his breath tearing in his throat, the complex, alien melodies chasing him through the twisting passages. The clicking sounds followed, seeming to echo his panicked footsteps, urging him on, or perhaps warning him never to return. He burst out of the cave mouth into the cold, pre-dawn air, gasping, his clothes damp with cave moisture and cold sweat. The familiar, bleak landscape had never looked so welcoming. He didn't stop until he reached his trailer, throwing the recorder onto his bunk, his hands shaking too violently to operate the ignition at first. He drove for hours, away from the desolate plains, away from the basalt forest and its impossible song. He didn't look back. Weeks later, back in the muted confines of his university office, Eris Thorne presented his findings. He played the recordings, the haunting, structured melodies, the deep, resonant pulses, the inexplicable clicking. He showed the data, the temporal analysis that placed the sounds before the birth of the rock itself. His colleagues listened with polite skepticism, then with growing concern. They spoke of equipment malfunction, of anomalous geothermal resonances misinterpreted, of auditory pareidolia brought on by isolation and stress. The idea of acoustic fossils older than their physical medium was deemed imaginative. Poetic, even. But not science. His paper was rejected. His grant renewal was subtly questioned. Eris didn't fight it. He knew what he had heard. He knew the chilling clarity of those nocturnal symphonies. He still works as an acoustic geologist, but something within him is irrevocably altered. The world seems quieter now, yet paradoxically, more filled with unheard sounds. He can no longer listen to the simple silence of a still room without his mind trying to fill it with the deep drones and ethereal overtones of the basalt forest. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he swears he can hear, faint and far away, the rhythmic clicking, a reminder of the ancient song still playing out in the dark heart of Iceland, waiting. His most precious possession is that single recorder, locked away. He rarely listens to it. He doesn't need to. The music is imprinted on his soul, a beautiful, terrifying secret that shattered his understanding of the world, a song from a time before time, played on instruments of stone and shadow. The earth, he now knows, doesn't just have bones. It has a voice, and sometimes, it sings of things best left undisturbed.